everybody. Welcome to today's meeting of the Planning Commission. Chair Wang is not here today, so I'll be chairing the commission meeting today in his place. And hopefully I think he plans to come, so he might join us a bit later. So let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Usually you start it. Are you going to start it? Oh.
Okay. The Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and
To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call. Commissioner Moore.
Here.
Commissioner Fong.
Here.
Commissioner Takahashi.
Here.
Vice Chair Saxena.
Here.
Chairperson Wayne is running a little bit late, so hopefully you'll join us a little bit later.
Thank you. So the first item on our agenda is the draft minutes of May 14th meeting. I'm not sure whether the minutes are attached or...
They were in the packet.
Oh, they're in the packet, okay. So unless we have some items, anybody want to propose any modifications for those? Any of the commissioners?
I don't necessarily want to modify them, but I would like to point out that they were very brief. There was just not a lot of information in there, and I was wondering if that is something that we can, remedy in the future. I've noticed that when I go into some of the other commissions' meeting minutes and even the city council meeting minutes, trying to find a summary, that it's very light on information, and then I end up needing to see the video, and I've heard this complaint from residents that our meeting minutes are too brief.
Do any of the city staff have any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, so the city has adopted action minutes, and that's went through public meeting, so that's why you see the meeting minutes being a lot briefer these days than previous.
Yeah, and just as a side point, this was something that we adopted last year. As a side point, because the full record is available, video record is available. It was the direction
Right.
we went.
Also because when the minutes were long, it was oftentimes there were mistakes. And so we would have to review them, point out the mistakes, and then go through this iterative process of getting the meeting minutes approved. So I think the decision being the fact that you have the full record of the actual meeting, if you really wanted details, that's where you would go. That was the point, if you will, of going to the action minutes. But
Thank you. Yeah. I guess one thing we could do is if there's something which is of importance which we want recorded, we can explicitly call it out. That way we can still keep the action minute format and have something which is really important to each of us as council, as members of this commission, to call it out so that city staff makes a point to record that. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah, part of the reason for action minutes, as Commissioner Takahashi pointed out, was that the challenge is that it becomes a challenge for the person who's writing the minutes. They may make an interpretation to summarize the discussion, and that was often coming up for even on very subtle things, very minor things, was often coming up as an issue. So I think it was between that and then the practical matter of generating a transcript type minute. Is why this was done.
Thank you. Commissioner Moore, do you have anything to add?
I'm concerned that if we speak about this matter any further, it's now kind of an agenda.
Okay. So do we have a motion?
I move that we adopt the minutes as submitted.
Do you have a second?
I second that.
Let's go to the vote. I'm going to start the vote. Okay. So I press abstain for him, or is it automatic?
No, it's automatic. It will be absent.
Okay. Thank you. So the motion passes 4-0. All right. So we're going to move on to the next item. Item number 2, which was about the cell tower, has been postponed. So there's no discussion on it for today. The next item are the oral communications, and I think we have a bunch of guests here who want to speak. So please fill out the blue form and pass it on to the city staff here.
You want to read the section on oral communication?
Okay. This portion of meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the commission on any matter not on the agenda. Yeah, speakers are limited to 3 minutes. In most cases, state law will prohibit the commission from making any decisions with respect to a matter not on the agenda. Thank you.
No cards at the moment.
All right, thank you. Written communications. So I know all of us have this big packet here, which we have a chance to receive also in electronic format. Are we expected to do anything about this today? Or
The written communication has been printed out for you, but it's also part of the records. This is for your reference only.
okay,
You do not need to do anything else.
all right, thank you.
So with that, we do have some written communications on items 2 and 3. Item 2 has been continued. Thank you.
Okay. So there's a consent calendar. So that's what are we moving on next, or to something else?
We have no items on the consent.
Okay. Okay. So we move on to item 3, right? Thank you. The subject of this is the development and architecture and site approval permits that would allow the replacement of 9 one-story public storage facility buildings with 2 4-story buildings with basements. Fence exceptions that would allow electronic vehicular gates, and a tree removal permit that would allow the removal and replacement of 17 protected trees. The application numbers are DP 20803, ASA 20804, EXC 20801, TR 201911. The applicants, Storage Equities Incorporated, Andreas Friedman. The location is 20565 Valley Green Drive. The parcel number is 326-10044. The recommended action for this: the Planning Commission conduct the public hearing and recommend that the city find the project is exempt from CEQA and recommend approval per the draft resolutions. Tentative City Council hearing June 18, 2019. And we have a bunch of staff reports there.
So at this point, we will be giving you a staff presentation. The project manager, Eric Sorno, is here to give you that presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. So I will be presenting on public storage at 20565 Valley Green Drive. So just going over the site of the area. So the project is bounded by I-280 to the north. To the east, there's some residential condominiums. To the south, there's an office complex, and to the west, there is some residential apartments. The project is proposing to demolish approximately 54,000 square feet of public storage facility over 9 single-story buildings, and will have the replacement of a new storage facility consisting of 2 4-story buildings with basements measuring 263,671 square feet. There's also an electronic vehicle gate access along Building 1, and a tree removal permit to allow the removal and replacement of 17 protected trees. Going into the project data, The project is approximately 2.995 acres, or 130,462 square feet. As I stated before, the floor area is 54,186 square feet with a proposed 263,671 structure. Parking is going to be parked at 32 parking spaces. As part of the project analysis, staff consulted with Hexagon Transportations, Inc. To prepare a parking analysis where they recommended 23 parking spaces on site, but the applicant has provided 32 on site. And regarding the hours of operation roughly remain the same for the office hours. They'll be increasing the office hours to begin at 9 a.m. instead of 9:30 p.m. or 9:30. Sorry, beginning at 9 a.m. and then ending at 6 p.m. Still consistent with what they have. The gate access hours are allowed to remain at 6 a.m. but extended hours from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. So this is the site plan. So as I mentioned, there's 2 buildings on site. So this is building 1 and this is building 2. Building 1 measures 129,856 square feet and building 2, 133,815 square feet. So the project includes the following items. So the replacement of the existing manager's apartment and office sales area. So the manager's apartment's back here and the office area is out front. There is a new electronic vehicle gate, which is approximately in this area here, and a new 6-foot tall wrought iron fence along the perimeter here, and portion here. The project would also include an updated landscaping along the perimeter. The property including a large landscape area between the proposed structures and the condominiums. Setbacks from the front are 156 feet 5 inches from the property line, 40 feet from the northern property line, 10 feet from the side here, and 88 and 4 inches from here. The property is located in a planned development zoning district, which allows the development standards for a property to be developed in conjunction with the approval of the projects. So in this instance, staff has worked closely with the applicant and the city's consulting architect to really maximize the setbacks along the frontage. So like I said, along the front, there's 156 and 5 inch setback to this property line, where 55 is normally where they have 55 now. Setbacks from the rear are being increased from, I think it's 8 or 19 feet to about 88 feet in the rear. So the staff has worked closely with the applicant, kind of maximize the setbacks on site. So staff has reviewed the proposal with the city's consulting architect to design a building facade that has been designed to minimize visually intrusive impacts and massing. Building height ranges from approximately 41 feet 2 inches to 44 feet 5 inches, depending on the adjacent natural grade. The project has utilized building materials to provide a consistent architectural design to help minimize the massing of the building. And this is just an image of Building 1's northern elevation. So Building 1, as you can see, has a lot of different materials to kind of bring a different massing and breaking of the structure. We do have the applicant's architect who can discuss this a lot better than I can, and she'll be available for any questions. And this is the southern elevation. So in this elevation, you notice there's more landscaping. So this is, again, to help break that massing and help provide like a green screening between the properties. So landscaping, so part of the project, there is the removal of 17 protected trees, but will be replaced with 38 trees where 20 are required. So the removals are mainly along here and here. And as I said, the applicant has provided 38 trees on site where 20 are required. As part of the project, there's also a lot of landscaping, new landscaping going throughout the site. One of the big landscape features that the applicant has really driven is the along the frontage, really to separate the condominiums. There's a lot of green space, a lot of trees to kind of help soften the view from the condominiums into Building 1. So with the fence exception, so the project is proposing a fence exception for an electronic vehicle gate as required by our fence ordinance in section 19.48.040C. So the fence gate is approximately here. The vehicle gate is adjacent to Building 1, and it's more than 180 feet from the right-of-way, so from about here to here. and then more than 500 feet from the city's right-of-way along Valley Green Drive. So there's a private road easement that's shared between the properties that goes down here. And that's about 500 feet from Valley Green. So in regards to outreach, the applicant has done a lot of outreach on their own. They mailed notices to adjacent properties. They did email correspondence. They held their own community meeting. The applicant's going to talk a little bit about that, but he's done quite a bit. In regards to our noticing, the city has done, had site signage. There's a legal ad place. Notices mailed to adjacent property owners within 300 feet, as well as being posted, as well as the agenda being posted on the city's, excuse me, on the city's official notice bulletin board and posted on the city's website 1 week prior to the hearing. The environmental assessment, the project is categorically exempt from CEQA as an infill development. We do have a representative from LSA who helped prepare the memo. The use is consistent with the general plan as an industrial use and as an industrial use and zoning as an industrial use. Staff did receive public comments after the posting of the packet, so we're trying to address those now. So there was concerns with construction, so we have standard conditions of approval regarding pre-construction meetings and construction management, dust control, noise limits. There's also a concern about asbestos. The project is required to comply with the city's demolition requirements, which includes Backman's, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's asbestos requirements. So there's a sign-off and documentation that has to be provided to Backman prior to getting a demolition permit. Parking, as previously discussed, the site is to provide 32 parking spaces. There's 12 in front of the building 1 in that right in front of the office, and then another 20 spread throughout the site. As I mentioned, the categorical exemption memo was prepared by LSA for the infill development that has been prepared and analyzed for potential environmental impacts. And the standard conditions of approval, went too far, for that. So another concern was fire safety. So staff and the applicant have worked with the Santa Clara County Fire Department to ensure consistency with fire requirements. The project was reviewed and approved by both the city's building division and Santa Clara County Fire Department and met all their requirements. So in conclusion, staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council to find the project exempt from CEQA, approve the development permit, approve the architectural site approval, the fence exception, and the tree removal permit. I'm available for questions. We also have the applicant who has a presentation, depending on how you would like to proceed, but they're here for questions and comments, and we have the city's consulting environmental consultant as well to answer any environmental questions. And that's it.
A question about the process. Are we going to invite any public comments on this also?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is your opportunity if you have any questions for staff.
Okay.
After that, then you can open up to public comment, or you can ask the applicant to speak now and give a presentation before you ask staff questions. So depends how you want. If you have questions now for staff, we can answer that. You want us to wait until after the applicant has presented, we can do that as well.
Okay. I personally would prefer to wait unless the other commissioners prefer to have questions now.
I just had more, my questions were actually more geared to the staff in terms of.
Okay, so let's go to them now.
Yeah, it's just in going back to the public comment. There were 4 items. Construction, so I think I got the gist of that. That was concern over dust and primarily just dust, noise, and
Correct.
traditional construction. 2 was environmental, right? And so is that specifically asbestos?
No, it was just a general comment regarding the environmental analysis, regarding what the environmental analysis was. So for this project, we determined it was an infill exemption. As part of that exemption process, we contracted with LSA to prepare a categorical exemption memo to explain how that project meets that requirement.
So was the question then aligned towards the exemption status? I guess I want to know what the public comments were specifically so we can make sure we address them.
If I may.
Yes, definitely.
So the comment received exemption from CEQA. This is from Kathy Helgerson. The streamlining of CEQA and EIR is wrong. It is very important that the City of Cupertino look into each proposal for new buildings and building projects and include CEQA and EIR requirements to the projects, especially this one of this magnitude. So that's really what it's getting at.
Okay.
We did do an environmental analysis. It's
Okay.
not just a
Right.
blanket infill exemption period. It's infill exemption with a supporting document
Right.
that goes
Okay.
along with it.
And the parking concerns were just not enough?
Yeah, there was, I think the concern was that there was no parking. Well, right now at site, there's really no parking right in front of the
Right.
units.
Sure.
So this project would provide 12 up front. And so that allows for customers and that kind of thing to visit the site. And then there's 20 spread out between the buildings.
Okay. And then the specifics on was fire, emergency access?
Yes, so fire emergency access, and we worked with fire to get that. Well, the applicants worked really closely with the fire department and the city to get the concerns of fire addressed, and they met their requirements.
Right. What's the specific public feedback, though? Just concern about fire access, or?
It wasn't just fire access, it was, again, from
Yeah,
the comment.
sure.
Concerns about what's being stored in the units.
Okay, all right.
Access, this is just summarizing.
Yeah, that's all I'm after.
Proximity to the gas station, that's about 400 or 500 feet away.
Okay.
That's roughly it.
Okay, all right, thank you. One other question on outreach. The office buildings that are,
South.
yes, thank you. Was there any concern from the office building about privacy, given the tenant of that office building?
The applicant speak a lot more to it,
Okay,
but the
all right.
applicant met with that particular tenant and
Okay.
the property owner
Okay,
to work with them.
all right, thank you. That's all I had for staff.
Any more questions, commissioners?
Okay, so you've kind of changed the procedure here a little bit. So we're just asking staff question right now? That's it?
Then we can ask the applicant questions.
And then we'll go there. Okay. You mentioned the zoning for this site. When I looked it up, I didn't see that it was just industrial. I see that it's CG, ML, and residential. Planned development, general, commercial, industrial, and residential intent.
Yes.
Okay, so then when I look in the general plan, I see that it has a 25 dwelling units per acre and a max height of 45 feet. So technically, it's nearly 3 acres, it could have 75 residential units are possible. Is that right?
I think we round down, but roughly, yeah.
And it said that the setbacks are determined in the plan. So how do you do that exactly?
Yeah, so we work with a base starting with the one of the zoning districts. So in this case, we started with the industrial. So the applicant worked with that, and where there is where the proximity of the setbacks wants to increase a little bit, so particularly along the southern property line, we really work with the architect, the applicant, to kind of minimize any intrusive effects. So the design of the building goes through a lot. So essentially, if they're asking for any reduced setback, then we essentially ask for a very high quality architectural design. So if you notice, this public storage building doesn't look like any public storage building that you'll see in this area. And that's part of that review process.
There's a parapet on the building, and when I look at the sections, I'm seeing it at 53 foot 4 inches. So that looks like that's actually the tallest point on the building. And I don't see any sections or any elevations showing the adjacent, I think they're condominiums to the east, to see in comparison. And I also don't know if this is what the view would look like from, you know, from the freeway, what it's going to look like at night with the lights, or from the hotel. And it looks like the hotel is just out of your 300-foot noticing band. So I am a little curious about what they think about this project. Is it going to impact them at all? And just another point of clarification, when you do the 300 feet, are you going to the property boundaries or just a point in the center of the property?
It's
How's
from
that done?
the property boundaries.
Okay.
So it's essentially like a big bubble from the property
Okay,
line. So it
because
looks
that's what I drew to see
yeah.
who would be there, who would need to be noticed, and I came up with that. There is a table B on sheet 21 for site conditions. And it says, and I would just like some clarification on this. It says pollutants, including but not limited to the following: sediment and trash, grease and oil, heavy metals, and hazardous waste. What is that about?
Sheet 21.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not too sure. I'd have to defer to our environmental consultant, and the applicant as well.
Okay, I think we'll get there. So I also saw there's a 23,000 cubic yards of soil haul.
Mhm.
I'm getting that would be between 1,150 and 2,300 truck trips.
So, yeah, the environmental analysis looked at that portion. I can pull up that number.
Okay. I think I'm ready to move on to the environmental portion.
Commissioner Fung?
Comments at this time?
Okay, so I also don't have any comments at this time. So we can move on to the presentation by the applicant.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Andres Friedman. I work for Public Storage, represent them, and I have with me our architect and our civil engineer that will interact a little bit on the presentation. Thank you for having us here. We've been working over the last 3 years with the city to bring this project to Planning Commission, and we're very proud of the achievement, and we appreciate the hard work of staff who has got us through the process and bring you, I would say, a very unique public storage architectural facility. And a little bit of background, you may know a little bit about us, but we operate and own all our facilities. 98% of our facilities we own and operate, and we've been doing it since 1972. We have 2,400 locations around the country, about 147 here in the Bay Area. In the city of Cupertino, just the one that we are discussing here today, close to 200 million square feet of real estate. And we're long-term holders of our assets, and has come after 34 years of these developments where we are looking back into our existing projects and see what the community needs and what they want, and we're slowly identifying those that need redevelopment and addressed to properly serve our community. So we're investing in our assets. In some of them we're just painting and updating offices. In some others, like this one here, we are trying to rebuild and provide the necessary service for the community. And the investment on this particular one is about $32 million. On top of that investment, a benefit to the city is that the property taxes will increase after 40 years. We think there's going to go anywhere between $50,000 we're currently paid to probably $500,000. And if for sure the property will better serve the community. A lot of the units that we have today are too large. They're not climate controlled, and their look outside, so security-wise, are not ideal. So we're hoping that with this new development, we'll provide a very quality storage facility to the community. As part of this project, one thing that we identify early on is that we're not requesting any variance from the existing general plan or your zoning. It's pretty much consistent with the goals of the city. The architecture, as you've seen some images, and we'll let the architect talk more about it, is modern and state-of-the-art, energy efficient, with climate control and security access for our customers. The development itself, we've done several of these, have minor impact to traffic, no impact to schools, no impact to residential, and definitely no noise. If anything, it will be better because now the entire facility looks inwards. So all the customers, as they bring staff to their facilities, they go into a lobby and they go from there with their facilities. No impact or very little impact to the infrastructure. Probably the time that will have some impact to the community, as we identified through the report, will be through the construction period. And we have very significant mitigation measures, virtually to park on site. And we'll have a barrier for noise and dust. And the city has guidelines that we'll be following. The customers on this facility currently represent the majority of the city of Cupertino. Things that we did through our community meetings is that we've offered, through the construction and relocation to them to facilities within the immediate area during construction and relocate them back into the facility. So we did some public outreach on that regard, and when the time comes, when the construction goes forward, we'll be contacting them individually to see their desire to do and continue to, be with public storage. And as I said before, we're trying to address the needs of the community and provide the right size units that we're seeing. Eric spoke briefly about the location, so I won't talk more, but we're right against Caltrans property to the north. A question was asked about visibility. We did a couple of visibility studies to see the impact from the freeway. Really going on the 280, you barely see the property. You have all these eucalyptus trees from Caltrans that block the facility even when we are at 4 stories. The only point that we really see the top floor is through the bridge, when you're driving on the bridge through the Anza. We talked about the location. The existing condition of the property, I would say, is fair. We maintain it within the condition that exists, but it's definitely in need of an upgrade and providing better service to the community. An important focus of our design was early on in the process. This started back in January of 2018 to do community outreach. We did both individually and as a community, neighborhood community. On the map on the right shows the 4 immediate neighbors that we have. On the south, we have the developer who's Berg & Berg. We met with them and their owner, which is majority is Apple Computers. We discussed their concerns, and through the design effort and meetings, we went back and forth, and we have addressed most of them. And I've been, since that meeting, in constant communication with them via email of progress that we've made and changes that we made to the building. We also emailed back and forth Oak Park Terrace property manager, which is the apartment complex to the west. We also emailed and corresponded with the owner of that facility, which is Correct Foundation. At the same time, we contacted the condominium to the east. We went to one of the homeowners association meeting and met with the board and did a presentation of this project. And also, I think, tried to address most of their questions. I think majority of them came through the construction itself and how we can address construction and minimize the impact, which we explained to them through traffic control and barriers that we will be building, and on-site parking will try to minimize that. Also, a lot of the construction is opposite traffic from when they're coming out of their in the morning. We're coming in, so will not be too much in conflict with their own traffic. And so that's was the majority of the outreach. We culminated with a neighborhood meeting where we presented some of the existing tenants that we have at the facility came and asked questions. And it was positive, and we tried to incorporate as much as we could to our design. So with that, I would like to have our architect explain a little bit our site plan with the engineer and elevations. So Shab, if you don't mind, with KSP coming up.
You know, for me, no,
Want me
leave
to-
that there, if you can leave that there. Good evening. Yeah, this helps me. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Shab Vakili, Design Principal with KSP Studio. As Andreas mentioned, our team has been working on this project since 2016. We have worked closely with the planning staff, various city departments, as well as the Contra Costa Fire Department. We are very excited to be here tonight presenting to you. Our project site is roughly 2.9 acres with access off of Valley Green Drive. We have the 280 freeway and off-ramp to our north and neighboring development on our south and west property lines. Should I? How do you, when I change it? Okay, sorry about that. All right, go ahead. All 9 of the existing one-story drive-up buildings located at the site will be demolished. The redevelopment consists of 2 buildings. The east building with the main office is 129,856 square feet, and the west building with the manager's apartment is 133,805 square feet. Each building is 4 stories above ground plus basement. Site circulation is simple and clean, with 1 driveway running along the north property line. At the west end of the site, we have designed for a fire truck turnaround access point. A 12-foot easement along the north property line has been dedicated to the city for future bike path and trail. The buildings are located on the south, approximately 10 feet from the property line. New customers entering the property will have easy access to 12 parking spaces in front of the office. Existing customers can continue into the facility through a secured gate and access their units in either building through centrally located loading lobbies. There will be about 8 to 9 parking spaces, as well as a 30-foot wide loading area in front of each building. This will allow the customers to load and unload close to the elevators. This is also an area that is set within, carved out of the rectangular buildings, and pretty much hidden from the neighboring office and apartments and the condominium area. So it's facing the 280 freeway. Based on the city's parking study, 20 spaces were determined to be adequate for this facility. In our site design, we're providing 32 spaces, including 3 by the manager's apartment on the west end. New landscaping areas and trees have been located along the south, east, and west sides of our property. We're utilizing Italian cypress and Brisbane box, eucalyptus type species, along and within the 10-foot setback on the south side. We're creating a green transition and screening between our development and our neighbor to the south. The landscape along the north property will remain in its existing natural state. All new trees proposed shall be 24-inch box. There will be 17 existing trees removed, none are heritage trees, and replaced with 19 new trees. We're also proposing additional 37 new trees with a total of 54 existing and new. on the site. We will be planting grasses in the 2 bioretention basins along, one in the front and one in the east and west side of the property. Our civil engineer can explain more about the water retention area as well as the site. We are also utilizing ground cover and shrubs within all the landscape areas, which will range between 1 to 5 gallon plants. At this point, I'd like to ask Patrick to come up, and once he talks a little further about the site, I can come back and talk about the building.
Great.
Can I just leave this here?
Yeah, that works. So I just want to go over quickly the bicycle pedestrian easement that you see up on the screen. Our team, based on discussions with City Public Works, did provide a future easement dedication for a 12-foot multi-use path that Shab had mentioned earlier. And this occurs at the north side of the property, adjacent to the Santa Clara Valley Water District right-of-way. This connects, I believe, it's also in the staff report, but connects to the existing condo complex to the east. They have a sidewalk easement that takes people going back and forth to De Anza. We also coordinated with PG&E to allow the city to make these future improvements, and in general should be a benefit to the overall area. Shab did also mention about water quality areas, and I'll touch on 2 things. First, Commissioner Moore, you had mentioned on sheet 21 that there were some pollutants of concern. So in general, what we do is we list during construction what those possible pollutants could be. A project of this size usually requires a stormwater pollution prevention plan. And that plan is approved by the water district, the water board, that's correct. And then what happens is on a weekly basis, there are inspectors that come out, and during rain events, there are multiple inspections by a qualified inspector to make sure that those materials are being kept on site and dealt with accordingly. The second part of that is for the post-construction stormwater treatment. What we're using are biobasins, so bioretention areas that treat areas from your pavement, your roof areas, and your concrete sidewalk in landscape areas before discharging into the city's storm drain main. In this case, it'd actually be the water district's culvert. So in general, we're reducing the existing impervious area by quite a bit. I think it's about 20-something%. In addition, the bioretention areas help retain some of the water on site. So you're looking at lower future erosion impacts kind of down the road. I'll let Shab get back to the architecture.
The building design is modern in nature. There we go. We have articulation by stepping the building on the north side, as well as integrating variety of materials, textures, and colors, as you can tell. Functionally, as well as traditionally, storage facilities are internally focused uses. Our design goal for this location has been to achieve the feel of transparency, openness, and integration. We feel a modern design has been the right vehicle to achieve this goal. Materials being used are masonry, EIFS, stucco-like finish material, a metal panel system, as well as spandrel glazing and storefront systems at the office, tower, and where we have display areas as shown on the north elevations. I think you can see it in this slide as well as the tower. The south elevations, there you go, you can see part of that, have been well studied to ensure we listen to our neighbors and are thoughtful with consistent design on all 4 sides. We have integrated horizontal banding and vertical spandrel glazing systems, with trees being located strategically to help emphasize the openness and transparency of our design. I don't know if it's easy on this view, but our trees are basically flanking the spandrel vertical panels and hiding more of the solid CMU parts of the building in order to allow the feel of the transparency with the spandrel glass. It's better seen on the elevations. We have integrated the trees locating, we have already gone through that. The building colors were chosen specifically for this location through multiple studies and input by planning staff as well as the third-party architect from the city. Typical public storage color and branding are warm brown tones, and due to our continued discussions with the city and what we wanted to achieve for this site, we have moved towards the gray tones as seen. The site is secured on all sides with a 6-foot-high tubular metal fencing or the buildings. Access past the office is secured by an electronic gate, and only existing customers can enter using this their access code. Each building is secured at the loading lobby, and customers can only access their floors. There is security cameras in and outside of each lobby. We are a very secured facility, and a continued public storage has a security group that continuously evaluate their sites and determine additional cameras, limited access for customers, so that to enhance the facility and security for the customers. Our building is also, want to talk about a little bit of the energy efficiency of the building. As part of our project conditions, this facility will meet LEED Silver equivalency. Some of the energy efficient measures will include, we will implement and add energy efficient internal LED light fixtures that have integral sensors that are triggered by motion. So most of the time, the facility, the buildings are dark unless someone walks through the hallways. So it is very energy efficient, as is only used, or electricity is used when someone is in the facility. We use low water use toilet tanks, mechanical system that will be used for this project is a split system, high efficiency model. It will always be set to a median temperature of around 80 degrees, so there is no cooling of the building when there's no one there. Just keep it at a moderate, comfortable level. The building itself is all masonry, so the envelope itself, it has natural insulation. And the roof, we will have R30 insulation roof, so it will be a very efficient energy building. The office windows are insulated, as well as the display walls on the tower, as well as on the north side. I think that concludes the overall concept of our building: modern design, high efficiency, very clean and simple to fit in with the area. At that point, I'm done with my presentation. If anybody has any questions for Andreas, Patrick, or I.
Commissioners? Commissioner Takahashi, you start.
Real quick question. The windows facing south and actually east and west, the long windows.
Spandrels?
Yes. Are those glazed with no, are they translucent or clear?
They have a film behind it is a matte finish, so it's translucent. It's not, it's a matte kind of a finish. I didn't get a chance, but I did want to bring a sample of our spandrel. So it's actual glazing with a film behind it.
And are they actually functional, or is it a
No.
facade?
It's a facade.
Okay, thank you.
And do they reflect light or like mirror effects, or they just absorb or dissipate it?
Well, the film behind it is a gray, bluish gray, so it will absorb a little bit. It's not bright white. It won't reflect back out. It will absorb some light.
So this could be to anybody here. The staff report didn't talk about the number of units. The parking study did show approximately 2,400 storage units. Is that the intention?
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
that's the number of units we're projecting.
Great. And then the existing greenery, when you drive by the site today, you see a number of trees and shrubs. Those are those in the Caltrans area?
Right at the entry, right at the entry on the north side, yes.
Okay, and then
There's Easement.
when you're driving along on 280 and you look over at your site, there's actually a lot of greenery there,
Yeah.
but that's outside
Correct.
Water
Correct.
District.
Correct.
We're not removing any of
Okay.
those.
And then you had a fence located on the north side. Will that be inside of the easement?
Yeah, so the proposed fence
It looked like it was
right
marked on
there,
there. but-
which it
okay.
goes on the south side of the easement,
Yeah.
Right.
This,
right there.
this might actually be a question for the staff. The Junipero Serra Trail proposal actually shows the trail on the Water District land outside of the, outside, it's off this property.
Correct. So staff, Public Works included, has been working with the applicant to kind of address that. So the applicant has agreed to provide the city an easement over that 12-foot strip of PG&E, and they've worked with PG&E as a reference. So that area would, if the trail were to happen, would incorporate that 12-foot easement. So it would be modified, the drawings would be modified to incorporate that.
So is the intention there that if the, I saw this with Rainier Creek Trail, that one of the concerns has been that the width varies of the service area, the utility area. So was this an opportunity to maintain a greater width, or was the intention to actually run the trail on this property?
It's to maintain a greater width.
Okay,
Yeah, I think in my conversations with the Public Works engineer working on the projects, to help maintain that width, kind of at this point, it's kind of the beginning of the trail, or of a segment of the trail, so it would kind of help open up the trail.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the intent.
great. Thank you. And I think I have one other question, two others. One of them was, one of the written communications had a question about concern about people who are renting spaces there might store toxics or hazardous materials. That would be controlled by your rental agreement, right?
That is correct. When we sign the rental agreements with our customers, they know they cannot store any that is flammable or combustible.
Okay,
Correct.
great. And then my last question, I noticed that there was a change in the access hours. The current access hours are until 10 p.m. The proposed hours were until 9 p.m. for the storage facility. I was just curious whether that was intentional? Was there a reason for that, or?
Yeah, I believe we increased them for half an hour at the earlier and later, and it has more to do with convenience to our customers.
Oh, okay.
Because most of the people that come to our facilities come before or after work. So that's why it will
Yeah.
increase a little bit the time.
I was actually, just going to pull up the staff report on that. It looked like it was a reduction of an hour. Maybe
So are we talking about office hours or gate hours?
gate
Or both?
hours.
Gate hours, so gate hours would increase from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. So it's an additional hour.
Okay.
So essentially
all right.
6 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Okay, great. That's it for my questions. Thank you.
So These are the gate hours for the main gate or for the electronic gate? So,
So the way it works, so this gate right here can only be accessed by a code, and that's the gate access that will be after the office closes. That's where people will still be able to come in for another couple of hours to be able to access their facility.
Could you point to where the gate is right now?
The gate and the buildings are almost right up to here. If I go, let me go so you can see it on this one. So this is I'm sorry, I'm fighting a little bit with the mouse, right here. So this is the existing office. The gate is right here. So customers don't have where to park. Usually the traffic really is not significant. It's probably 2 trips in the morning, 3 trips. So they will park here, they will come and try to rent, and then the gate will open and they'll come in. But most of our customers come, park here, punch the code, and then go right into their units.
Okay.
So this building today, the new building, will go about 150 feet back here. So a lot of the design intent was to create this setback greenery to address and be as far as possible from the condominiums.
while we're at it, the trees you're going to remove are the ones near the northwest corner?
So there's a couple, yeah, and not all of them are healthy. The majority are, but there's 2 or 3 that are not. There's some trees here that will be removed. There are trees on the neighbor's property along the side that will remain. And there are a couple of other trees on this end that will have to be removed. All these trees we were talking about, these are all the Caltrans trees. All these trees here will remain as well, will be protected during construction.
You mentioned the LED lights, so I'm wondering, are those internal to the structure, or if I was driving by on the 280, would I see the lights come on with somebody walking down a hallway, like in the grocery store, that type of thing? What would the effect be?
They are all internal, and all of our displays are with faux doors. So when you're looking at some of the views that we have and you see storage doors, those are not actual storage doors. You're not seeing inside into the storage building. We've created a separate space, and those are lit by can lights.
And they're reflected inwards, not outwards.
Yeah, to shine on the doors itself at night. So all the LED lights are in the hallways.
You had mentioned that the loading is from an interior elevator. So could you talk just a little bit about that, because I'm a bit confused about how people get access to the 4 stories.
So as you can see, the building footprint, building 1, we have an area that. Thank you. There. So this is where the customers would park, and then they would enter into this building right about this area. And it's a secured lobby. So it's basically a 20-foot by 20-foot lobby that gives them access to 2 elevators, restrooms, drinking fountain, very compact. And that area itself is secured. So there's doors from that point going into the storage facility. But unless the customer has a storage unit on the first floor, they would not be able to pass through that door. So they would enter into the elevators, either go to 2nd, 3rd, 4th, whichever floor that their unit is. That's the code they would put in, and the elevator would only take them to that floor. So it's a secured area. And this is, there's a much larger loading area out in front of the building. But what we've done is create the parking and access into the building internally with the building, so it's kind of concealed as well.
So where you see the lobby, all those parking spaces parked, there's no first and second floor, so you're under the third and fourth floor when you're parked, if that makes sense. So we try to hide it also to create more, quiet environment.
So the parking is in a covered area.
Yeah, let's see if the elevation gives you a better sense of that. Yeah, it's hard to see on these elevations, but correct, they're covered. Yes.
Parts of them.
This rendering is showing a bike path, and it sounds as though the actual bike path is going to be behind the chain link fence. And are you planning on altering the chain link fence? I think I might have read something about that.
Yeah, so we're probably not going to put a chain link fence back. It's going to be an iron fence that we're going to put there. We're still evaluating, but an opportunity with the art requirement is to see if we can create some kind of an art feature on the fence so that the path and the easement itself has some kind of a nice feature when you're walking or biking.
And can we clarify this? So I went to visit the site and I saw the chain link fence and I could see the drainage swale behind it. And so now I'm a little confused where this PG&E easement is in relation to the chain link fence I was looking at and the drainage swale, because I know there was some discussion about possibly making a box culvert out of the drainage swale in parts for the Junipero Serra Trail. So could someone point to that?
Yeah, let me try this. So what we're showing here is the kind of the north side, the second set of orange lines at the top kind of denote our property edge, if you will. And just north of our property edge is the Santa Clara Valley Water District right-of-way, which encompasses this, culvert drainage channel that's a line drainage channel that's currently running adjacent to our property. What PG&E has is they have an easement on our property, because if you'll see from some of the elevations, I believe you see a power pole right there, right at the edge. So that's kind of where their easement goes through in order to maintain and access those lines. Past that is the Caltrans right away. The 12-foot easement would be on the project property.
Okay, so are you giving up 12 feet?
Correct.
You're pulling in your chain link fence?
Correct.
And
Right.
you're going to change it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
We're dedicating 12-foot easement to the city. Yeah.
So the chain link fence is on the south of the
Correct.
It's
Not
a
chain link,
wrought
right.
iron. The
Yeah.
proposed is a wrought iron fence. So on the
So we're
part-
upgrading the
Yeah.
quality of the.
so it's like the metal wrought.
This is a question for staff.
Mhm.
So you have incorporated this into the Junipero?
No, not yet, because the project hasn't been approved.
Okay.
So staff has been working with the applicant in the event that this does get approved, so that we can make the necessary changes. But because we don't have it approved, we can't make the changes yet. But the engineer in charge of Junipero Serra Trail is actually helping with the plan review on this project. So they've been working together on it.
Okay, and did you also it sounds like you did some negotiating about the colors. Was the quantity of orange also under discussion?
Yes, it's a lot less than it was.
Unfortunately, yes.
I will say that the applicant did work with us to reduce the amount of the orange, which is their standard staple corporate logo. So, but maybe Andres can speak a little bit more about those efforts.
Yeah, no, we really are like a retailer, like a Target or Home Depot, where we try through the design of the building, do the signage. And I would say, yes, this building is not a typical public storage orange building. I'm proud of the result.
You have a manager's apartment on the site. Could we talk about where that is located?
Sure.
And where would they park also?
Yes, so Building 2 at the west end, right in this corner, is the manager's apartment. And then we have provided parking along this side. I think the site plan, the technical site plan that was shown earlier to you, that is more reflective of specifics. This is more of a rendering, illustrative, so.
I'll pull that up right now if you like. So it's, this is okay, perfect. So that's the manager's unit out back, and these are some stalls that they could potentially utilize for them. There's 3 stalls back there.
Okay, so they are not covered parking?
No.
Actually, I had some questions based on some feedback, emails we received from the people living nearby about the traffic during construction. Okay.
Yes.
I presume the small driveway which leads to the property, that will not be used for parking or anything like that?
Absolutely
during-
not, no.
Okay. In terms of the amount of equipment which will be needed to dig and excavate it, can it all fit in easily here, or will they be coming in and going in every day, or what is the plan for that?
No, we have sufficient space on the site to be able to have not just the equipment, but we believe also the parking for the workers. The future easement is where we envision, parkings for the most part will be there. Also, when we do, after demolition, we'll have all that frontage, 150 feet in the front, to use it as parking. And to the extent we can do that, we'll be finding a site off-site to bring people in the morning and the afternoons if needed, but we don't believe that will be the case. Most of, I would say, the excavation that will be required for this project will take in a period of about 6 weeks. And after that, the buildings go relatively fast and enclose relatively fast, probably within 4 months. And then the rest of the construction happens inside the buildings. The entire construction, including grading and demolition, we envision 13 to 14 months from start to end.
Thank you. So during the 6 weeks where you're having the demolition and the excavation, how many truck trips are expected? I think you had a pretty large number for that, right?
I'm sorry, I'm not going to have that information with me, that precise information.
Okay, so I have, you have 23,000 cubic yards of soil haul. And depending on if you're saying, if you've got a double, truck, you can get 20 cubic yards about. So, or if you have trouble fitting those in, which you might, somewhere around 1,150 to 2,300 truck trips. So that's about 42 a day.
It's about over 6 weeks, so.
Over the 6 weeks, if you have 5
Yep.
days a week, yeah,
You're correct, Monday through Friday only.
right. So that,
Okay, so about 42 per day is what you estimate? Okay. Residents also had some and the road is shared with the apartment, is I presume?
I'm sorry?
The road which access the property is also shared by the condo complex, is that?
No, it's fully, so this parking that you see here on this site plan is fully dedicated just for
So this
us.
access, the road which goes to your property, it's only for your property, or it also serves?
This roadway is shared.
Okay, So that's the concern with the residents.
And yeah, I'm fully aware. It's shared today, and it was shared when they did the construction of theirs as well. So we're aware of that. And I mean, we investigate, and we continue to investigate the opportunity to come through the other side, even though that will have to be the apartment complex, to see if there's a way to have some temporary construction access to minimize that. But we haven't been lucky of, getting anything there. But we are aware, and we're trying to mitigate it to the extent it's possible. The good news is that it's temporary. When this facility is open and it's operational, the traffic is very, very small. But yes, we are aware of it.
Good, thanks.
I'd like to provide some information from an environmental impact report further down on the I-280. And this was something that was done for the Valco project, and they studied the air quality next to the freeway and also the noise projection. And we also have future noise contours in our general plan and land use compatibility charts. And then from the Valco study, they had mitigations which they needed to do for air pollution and noise for the units because of the proximity to the freeway. So I can quickly show you their information so that you've also seen it. Okay, so this information comes from the Valco Special Area Specific Plan, and their final EIR was actually certified at the end of last year. And so they're looking at the impact coming onto the property from the I-280. And so this site is approximately, I would say maybe a half a mile from the De Anza exit. So you can see the purple bands are showing the air pollution, the PM 2.5 concentrations, which are excessive. So you can
Is this
pretty well.
applicable, though? Because 280 is recessed when it goes by the public storage, and it's ground level at this point in time. So there'll probably be some effect of that probably would have to be understood. But there's a little difference. Just thought I'd point that out in terms of the scenarios.
Okay, so we can continue? Okay. And then we're also looking at the noise contours along the 280. And we have some requirements in our general plan to maintain interior noise levels. Okay? And then we also, in our general plan, have future noise contours. And so you're in the red zone, and thank you. Yeah, that one. And this one is showing the land use compatibility. That's good. And then the EIR has mitigation measures. So there we are. So they even discuss cancer risk potential.
Does it make a difference that it's public storage versus residence?
You have the manager's unit is the point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one thing might be considered is, with regard to that manager's unit, given this data, whether or not some sort of extra filtering
Right.
associated with the residents.
And this is the page right
Okay.
here. This is the one. And also, with regards to the noise level, you know, whether or not there would need to be triple pane glass or something like that for that manager's unit. So they suggest, you know, air filtration systems, trees and vegetation. It looks like you already have that type of thing, but there are mitigation measures that were suggested due to the freeway. Okay, and I think that, yeah, does that sum it up? Okay, and this is talking about the noise, and they have some mitigation measures suggested for that too, because we have requirements for the noise levels. So here it's saying the state of California requires that interior noise levels be maintained at 45 decibels or less. So there should be some application of that for this unit. Okay. Is that it? All right, thank you.
All right.
Commissioners, any more questions for? Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any public comments on this topic?
Jeff, we can fill it later.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yes, thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, Mr. Chair for the evening. Hi, I'm Jennifer Griffin, and I appreciate Public Storage taking so much effort to make the building look very, very nice. I think that it says a lot for the company that they're willing to work with the staff and the city to come up with something that looks as nice as this. And I think the colors are very nice too. I just had a couple of comments. I understand that you all are attempting to focus the business of the building inside, and I'm assuming that's facing north. I think 280 is north. I was a little bit confused on the diagram of which direction was east or west. Is that 280. North, south, east, and west? Okay. And Valley Green is here. I just had a comment in that it sounds like the building, the complex that's immediately south of your property, it looked like your new building would be only 10 feet from the property line, and that is a little bit concerning to me because you have, it looks like on that side, the southern side, there was no articulation or it's a straight vertical run. And I was really curious about that, why there was no treatment of the southern side and why it's so close to the adjacent property line. It looks like there's a parking lot there now that the people, I believe that that's a commercial building that's to the south and that's a parking lot. But I would be concerned that in future, if that property, commercial property, was redeveloped that is to the south, and someone put in housing there, that having a straight vertical run that's only for 4 stories, it's only 10 feet from the property line, may set up an issue that it would be in infringement, or it would be incompatible with the ability of the owner to the south to redevelop their property, particularly if there was housing put on the property. I know we're looking forward, but I'm assuming that that the public storage property will be there for a long period of time, which is very good. But I just, in general, things having only 2 setbacks when there's a 4-story building vertical really makes me very, very nervous. And I was wondering if you all could discuss the treatment of why this building's only 10 feet from the southern property line. And perhaps they could either can't move the building, have setbacks on the second or third story or move it back to 20 feet. I just think that that's infringing on the neighborhood property down there. And what about shading where, well, 4 stories, 40 feet is potentially going to shade someone around there.
Thank you, Jennifer.
We know that because we have a 10-story hotel going on Stern Avenue in the eastern end. Thank you.
Any more public comments? So I actually had a question about what Jennifer just raised. I presume whatever we have here is in the compliance with the zoning laws and the code here. So the 10 feet is what we need for something like this.
Yeah, and part of that too, the 10 feet, there's a 40-foot setback on the other side that goes to allow for access for fire. So fire has a minimum setback that they need for their engines in case of emergency. So there's a reason why that setback is at that size. We essentially maximize that setback to meet fire's requirements.
Thank you. Commissioners, do we want to talk about anything else on this topic?
Can we discuss the categorical exemption and how that was arrived at?
So do you have a question for the staff?
Can we talk about how that was arrived at?
Yeah. So we have our consultant with LSA who can discuss that.
Okay.
Hello, Matthew Wiswell from LSA. Do you have any particular questions, or would you like me to just give an overview, or?
Some kind of a high-level summary would be great, and then try to tie that into the comments that I made about the air quality in the freeway and the mitigation, potential mitigation measures which we might want to have there for that. Thank you.
Yeah. So the CEQA guidelines, which are published by the state of California, include a list of projects that are categorically exempt from further environmental review. In this case, this is Class 32 infill development. So there are a number of performance standards that a project has to meet, among them including surrounded by a certain amount of development, served by utilities, and then there are a number of exceptions as well, that if a project includes an exception, it would be excluded from being able to use a categorical exemption. So we prepared, as Eric mentioned earlier, a memo that goes through each of the performance standards as well as the exceptions, and why the project qualifies and does not include any of the exceptions. So we did include an evaluation of the air quality effects, but that would be the effects of construction and operation of the project on the environment. In terms of the manager's unit, there is a manager's unit on site today, and the location of the proposed manager's unit would be further away from 280, so it would actually be less of an effect on that resident there. And then for noise, we've noted that I believe on site, based on our modeling, the noise level is 69 decibels, which would be a conditionally permitted use with further noise study based on the interior levels. So we model the interior levels as well, and as you mentioned, the permitted noise level is 45 decibels, and we show with standard construction materials and including common ventilation systems, HVAC systems, that it would be 44.2 decibels inside, so therefore it would be compatible. So that hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Any more questions? Commissioner Takahashi? Commissioner Moore? So I guess the next step here is to discuss among the commissioners and maybe take a vote on the motion?
Yeah, you can deliberate amongst the planning commission, and after which you can entertain a motion.
Okay. So Commissioner Moore, do you have any more questions to ask?
Well, I guess I'm wondering if that unit is going to have air filtration provided for it, and will it have, you know, triple pane glass? You know, how is that going to be done to ensure that they are in a, you know, safe and healthy environment?
Okay. I think that's a very valid point. I think the existing unit might have been built to standards which existed like 30 or 40 years ago when this was built. And I guess we are in a different time right now. So do you suggest some, apart from the triple glass and the ventilation, what would you recommend we add or suggest to this?
Well, I suppose you could look at what the mitigation measures were in the study that I mentioned,
Okay.
and see if there's, you know, if there's good reason to implement those, and see if that can be added.
City staff?
Yeah, good.
Ben?
That would recommend maybe that staff ensures compliance to environmental for that unit, given the proximity to the freeway. Is that something that?
Yeah, that would be a standard practice, and I think Eric can ensure that step is followed.
Right, because with regard to noise, there was a model, but probably
Right.
some validation.
Yeah,
of that
we've
maybe.
had a condition in other projects we didn't have on this one that requires a noise study prior to occupancy to make sure that they meet the noise requirements. So essentially, there's a acoustic engineer or something like that goes in there, measures it to confirm that the noise levels are being met.
And what about the ventilation?
I think we could look at that as well. We can work on a condition with our consultant to make sure that that's followed. But as he indicated in the analysis, it shows that it should meet that requirement. We can get the definitive language built in, I think.
So is that a building inspection issue? It's actually a building inspection issue rather than a planning issue, right?
It is. It's towards the construction. We don't get into that necessarily detail at this point.
Yeah.
These are more, for lack of a better term, conceptual. But where there's concerns and where there's things that we can, ensure consistency, we can refer to that in the memo to ensure
Right.
that is being met and how that's
Yeah.
being met.
I think my only comment there would be that, there are a great many of items that are checked in the building inspection. I would encourage them to, encourage you to make a note of that.
Yeah.
To make sure that, that the final permit of occupancy, that you're in compliance. Otherwise, I suspect, this was actually an industrial zoned area, so there may have been other requirements as well.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into different types of construction. Like you
Right.
said, there's a lot that goes into it. That I can't really get into too much detail, but definitely building is definitely part of this conversation, as is fire, as is public works on the different departments.
Again, it was mentioned that this was an industrial zone, but it's actually general commercial industrial.
Right. I should clarify that it includes industrial, but it's planned development with general commercial, industrial, and residential intent. And correct. You're correct.
All right. Any more items of discussion?
Well, I do kind of wonder if there was some consideration of having a green wall as opposed to having the trees on the south side. Having green walls, the vertical green wall to break up that space, instead of having, trees which might drop things, but if you had something actually right on the wall, it could actually be easier and less maintenance for the owners.
So in terms of the tree line on the south side.
Right, on the south side, I think it was maybe some cypress and, podocarpus, something like that. But if they went with the green wall, they'd get to, a similar effect, but it'd be right on the building rather than having something that might, extend out and drop leaf litter.
So that's probably a significant matter of taste, would be my guess, right? Some people might think a green wall would look good, and others might think it looks like a fence at a ballpark. So, just, right, I mean, it's like anything, there's some people like and some people won't, so I'm not sure if, I mean, what's there with regard to the structure, to me, is relatively attractive, offset or enhanced by the plantings that are there, I think would look good. The owner obviously has to maintain that landscaping as part of planting that. But I don't know if we want to discuss that further in terms of.
I think either would be allowed normally, just per, you would have to get a landscape approval. It's their call, right?
So, yeah, so
Well, but
we-
then there's that changes the tree element significantly, right? In terms of not planting all those, there were several, 20 some odd trees on that.
So a couple points, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
A green wall, actually, typically, it may be a challenge to maintain. Have you seen some green walls around town, whether it's in our city or elsewhere? It's always been a challenge to maintain. It sounds really great in theory, but I think it requires a significant level of maintenance from the applicant. But if the commission wishes to incorporate that as part of the design, we can certainly work with the applicant. We'll have the discussion, see if that's something they'd be willing to supply. But that will be up to the applicant. So.
If you don't mind, I'll just one comment. I think that's a point that it's really hard to maintain, to go up there and make sure that it always looks green and nice. But as important as that is the watering of these walls, I'm concerned about water penetration and then having humidity inside the units. And when you rent the units, you don't know what's happening inside, and then it becomes an environmental issue. So to the extent we can avoid putting plants against the building will be a benefit, I think.
By the way, as to the humidity levels that you mentioned, you're trying to keep, what, below 50% humidity, something like that?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any more questions? All right, so.
Actually, I'll comment. This looks like a good proposal to me. I think that it was interesting. It was interesting to select the large setbacks from the residential areas on the side. I think it's a good neighbor. It's a good neighbor effort there. And I think that's appreciated. It seems like there's been a lot of effort on the design to make something that's deviates a little bit from what you typically would do. I think that's appreciated as well. In general, I feel this is compliant project that will be a benefit to the city.
Yeah, I definitely agree with those comments. I think the outreach that you went through and addressed as much as possible neighbors' concerns definitely shows your desire to be a good neighbor to those tenants, and hopefully they appreciate any accommodations that you made to the project, including the offsets. I think the design looks very well thought out. The fact that those orange doors that you see through the windows are a facade really points to your strong branding of that orange door as a key element, which I totally understand in terms of you see an orange door, you know whose storage unit that is. And I gotta believe it's one of the best looking storage units that you'll build. So I'm impressed by that. So I definitely support the project. It's a big project. I think the construction and the demolition will be disruptive. And so ensuring compliance to the city's demolition and construction guidelines in terms of hours and all of those things are another step towards making sure that you are doing as little disruption as possible for the neighbors. Yeah, I think it's a good project.
Commissioner Moore?
I agree with Commissioner Takahashi and Commissioner Fung. I have stated my apprehensions about the health and safety for the manager's unit, but I am being assured that everything is going to be done to comply with the recommendations that we've already been presented with. I think that the neighbors to the east, going from 55 to 156 5 inches is very generous, and it actually looked like they were getting a small landscape area for themselves, which they didn't have before, which should be very nice. I also greatly appreciate the 12-foot easement offering. I think that's wonderful, because it's a challenge to get that path along the swale there. And I'm glad that there's been negotiation around the orange. That was a bit of an issue. So all in all, I think you've done a very nice job with this.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Well, I think the 3 other commissioners have pretty much said what I would like to have said, but I'll just reiterate that I agree with a lot of the stuff they've said. I especially appreciate the fact that you reached out to the communities and you've been sensitive around that. The 12-foot easement is very well appreciated. Hopefully the city can find a way of using it and making it part of something else. I do want to echo Commissioner Moore's concern about the manager's unit. Let's make it sure that it's within the guidelines. The only request I would have is not only to follow the city laws when it comes to the demolition part. I mean, that's where the biggest thing, but go above and beyond to take the people around you in confidence and make sure it's the least disruptive given your own commercial constraints. I think sometimes just making sure that the trucks come in after 8:30 when people have left for schools can make life a lot easier for the people around them. So just be sensitive to them and work as somebody who cares for the people around them is what I would encourage you to do. Thank you. So let's get to the motion part. Do we have a motion to support the recommended action?
I can do it. Let's see, should we do them, do you want us to do them separately? Is that?
You can do them together.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. So I move that we adopt the draft resolution presented for DP 2018-03 to approve the demolition and construction of a new public storage facility. Number 2, application number ASA 2018-03 to approve the architectural and site approval permits for this project. Let's see, application EXC 2018-01, that the Planning Commission approves the fence exception to allow an electronic vehicle gate. And finally, the tree exemption. Application TR 2019-11, that the Planning Commission recommends approval of a tree removal permit to allow the removal and replacement of 17 trees. And I think that's it.
Sequel findings?
Yes. Yes. And I guess on all 4 of these, is that how we say this? Yes. That we find the project exempt from CEQA, and that we find the project exempt from CEQA.
Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Let's go to the vote. Okay. Start vote. You can vote now.
Yeah.
So the motion passes 4-0. Commissioner Ray is absent. Thank you. Okay, so now we're moving on to subject number 4 on the agenda. A review of the 5-year capital improvement program, financial year 2019-2020, 2023-24, for conformity to the city's general plan. Application numbers, Capital Improvement Program, CIP. Applicants, City of Cupertino, and the location is citywide.
All right, well, good evening. Give me one moment here.
So we have staff from the Public Works Department. We have the Acting Director, Roger Lee, as well as Michael Zimmerman, the CIP Program Manager, here today to present the item.
Yes, good evening. It's a pleasure to present to the Commission. So Vice Commissioner, Commissioners, good evening. Roger Lee, Acting Director of Public Works. We always like to talk about Public Works projects and the good things that we do there. So this first slide is very similar to what we presented to our council on April the 30th and then again on May the 13th. The next slide, we'll just go over how I have this presentation outlined. And I can be quite brief on this if it's at the pleasure of the commission, or like I said, we like to talk about these projects, and even the lengthy one, I'll get through this in probably 5 minutes or so. So if it pleases the commission, I'll go through this with a little bit more detail than not. Okay, very good. All right, so the first is just the recommended action, and that was in your staff report. One was to find that that it is exempt from CEQA, and that the proposed CIP for fiscal year 1920 is consistent with the general plan. That is the recommended action. Then the applicable government codes that apply to this. Seth knows those in more details than I. We'll have a couple slides on those, and perhaps he can get into the details on those too. And then I'll just go over just an overview of our CIP selection process, what we do, and then get some details into the 2 study sessions that I mentioned with council. And then I had the 2 projects that are, they're larger, and they really sort of did drive our CIP and where we are right now. I'll just touch on that with the library expansion and City Hall. And then I'll get into the details of what we have recommended for next fiscal year. So the first are the applicable government code sections, sections 65.401 and 402. And I'll let Seth sort of define the subtleties between these 2 codes, because you have to read them twice to see how they're different.
Yeah, good evening, Commissioners. So I wanted to provide an important clarification to the staff report and the code section authorizing what you're doing tonight that was explained there. The staff report cited Government Code Section 65.403. I should have, and regret not adding Government Code Sections 65.401 and 2 to the report. Those sections in totality kind of provide the full picture about what you're doing tonight and what your authority is under the state law. So together, sections 65.401 and 2, which is on the next slide, have substantially similar language, and effectively they require the planning agency of any municipality to, quote, review and report on the conformity of the proposed public building and structures, that is the public projects for the coming fiscal year, with the general plan and the goals, policies, and standards therein. The language in the staff report, on the other hand, refers specifically to a CIP, an improvement program that is proposed by an agency within the city's jurisdiction that is other than the city. So that would be like a special district or other agencies. So I wanted, I don't know if those projects are actually included in the very lengthy CIP you're reviewing tonight, but I wanted to provide the additional code sections to the extent that city projects are being proposed. But your review and reporting authority is the same. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can answer any further questions on that you might have.
Yes, I have some questions on what is the definition of conformity, and is this like doing a, for instance, an SB 35 consistency analysis where you're going to have, you'll have your what you're doing, what the general plan says, and whether or not it's consistent. Is that what this means?
I'll provide a brief legal interpretation on the spot here, and then I'll turn it over to staff who've had, I believe, years of experience doing this thing, and maybe can provide some background on what the city has done in the past. But this is different from a ministerial process, so you're exercising discretion this evening. That's your authority to do so under under state law and the city code. And so you're interpreting, as a policy matter, your general plan and the other documents that fall under it, and deciding whether the proposed actions for the next fiscal year are consistent with them. So meet the description of the applicable standard policy or goal.
So it's discretionary because we're having a hearing, and we could say, we could go either way?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know if staff wants to add anything about your own experience conducting this process in the past.
Yeah, I mean, this is very similar to how we've done it in the past. the projects that you're reviewing tonight, you're not, if you find conformance, they will be going on to a next step to be confirmed by the city council on whether or not we're going to be proceeding with these projects. And so as these projects would proceed in the event that they are authorized, all the CEQA determinations would be unique to each of the various projects that are being proposed for next fiscal year CIP. Okay. All right. So our projects in Public Works, we categorize them 4 different ways. One is the Category 1 projects. And the Category 1 project it's a new project. So it's not existed before. It may be a follow-up to a prior feasibility report or something like that. But it's a new project. That's a Category 1, and that would be what's being proposed for next fiscal year. Because resources are always limited, there's just a finite number of new projects that we'll be proposing, and I'll talk about how they're prioritized in a moment. For the Category 2 project is an existing project that's multi-year funded, and so we have a variety of those. One that comes to my mind first is when we make accessible improvements throughout the city. That's a yearly thing that we do. We could have a streetlight infill type of a project. Those are multi-year projects. That's a Category 2 project. So something we've done in the past, and we expect to continue to do so in the future. And then Category 3 projects they're projects that are existing. They're in place now. They're completely funded. So we have a variety of those that are in the works right now. You can think of like the McClellan Ranch or the McClellan Road separated bikeway project that's going on right now on McClellan west of Stelling. That would be a Category 3 project. It's existing. It's funded. I won't spend time on those that are already ongoing because they've already come to the commission on a prior date. And then our Category 4 project are projects that have some type of external funding, such as a grant or a donation, that they're potentials for our council to consider. And we heard some of the considerations on these projects, and I'll talk more in detail in future slides as to projects that had been Category 4 that our council desires to be Category 1. They want them to be a new project and be proceeding next year. And then we have a much longer list of projects which we call unfunded. So that's it's sort of analogous to a wish list. There are things that are wanted. Some could argue that are needed, but they just don't have a current funding source. And they're not in the next year's CIP, but they remain there because you always want to know your greater need as you start to allocate the scarce resources that you have. So we have unfunded projects. Now on master plans, I'm sure you've heard of like our 2016 bicycle master plan, our 2018 pedestrian master plan. We have these plans that prioritize projects. And then in Public Works, after that community input and outreach has occurred, they become prioritized in those projects. And then, absent any other direction from council, we will then proceed to propose those projects for the next fiscal years, depending on the amount of available funding that is available. But we also have other projects that go through a citywide prioritization, like our building condition assessment that's done on all of our 45 different facilities throughout the city. We completed that last year, and we look at, and it's sort of similar to our storm drain master plan that was adopted late in 2018, where we look at the needs of these facilities and we rank them on things such as health and safety, on just the resiliency and reliability. And we look at comfort and cost efficiency to continue to maintain that asset. So those are things that we look at for prioritizations of projects, and obviously we're looking at those that place high on prioritization and master plans, and also that have some health and safety concerns. That typically is what populates our capital improvement projects. And obviously we have to parse it out that way because there's only a certain amount of dollars that are available in staffing to make these things happen. Michael Zimmerman, he's our capital projects manager. There's only so much we can deliver at any one calendar year. We can bring on consultants and whatnot, but we are constrained that way as well. So in this next slide, we had what we discussed in April 30th. And at that point, it was our first time that we had taken our CIP to the council, and we really had a variety of options that we had presented to them, and it really hinged largely on what they desired to do with our city hall. Our city hall was identified in our building, our citywide building condition assessment, as having several health and safety related needs. Seismic is a big concern at the building. The mechanical systems are well beyond their useful life. The amount of air exchanges in the building, things of that nature. And so, but because it is a $70.5 million project estimated, that would certainly drive what other CIPs could be performed in that year if we were to also tackle the city hall and the amount of different funding strategies that would have to be employed to make that project viable as well. And then the second large project is the library expansion, and I'll talk about that in more detail. But and then intertwined with both of those projects is just some of the parking deficiencies that we have at the Civic Center Plaza itself. So when we went to council on the 30th, we really parsed it out to where we talked about the city hall and the library together. We used the word decouple because council did have a desire and they instructed staff to decouple those two projects. And at that early stage in April 30th, the staff's recommendation to proceed with a new city hall, and we'd gone through a master plan process back in 2015 for that. And it would include 118 underground parking stalls at the new city hall. And if that were to occur, then that would take care of the parking needs for the library expansion at the same time. And then if we were to phase that work in such a way that we constructed City Hall substantially and had the underground parking stalls constructed, we then could free up parking in the front, and we could construct library without having to construct temporary parking. And so the projects were coupled that way just because of parking and trying to avoid building a temporary parking location. But council in April 30th said to decouple those together, and I'll talk about what we did at the May 13th meeting. They also wanted us to look at library construction costs with other cities. Notably, it was the city of Campbell and the city of Morgan Hill are undergoing some library improvement projects, and they had some estimates. Campbell is much further behind. You may know that they had Measure O to help fund that, but they're still a few years away before they're going to be doing anything with their library. And Morgan Hill had gone out to bid, and it had some high bids, but we want to make sure, there is a desire from our council and staff alike to have a project that's value engineered and delivers the most project that it can at the least cost. They want more detail on the seismic needs at the existing city hall. And they also were interested in us looking, beyond a 5-year CIP budget into more of a 10-year CIP frame, and we agree with that. We're not able in the time that we have to do that in its totality and as complete as we need to before the June 18th budget adoption hearing. But we committed to council that we would be doing that, and it wasn't necessarily tied to any budget calendar or schedule, that we would happily go and do that out of the normal budget cycle as soon as we could get the numbers together. And then I think the community outreach really, I think it talked about City Hall and what would be needed, to get the community behind a project that required so many resources as a City Hall. So that's and so we talked about that, and then we went into the other projects that we'll be spending most of my presentation on, because these were the big projects in the room. The library expansion is about $10.5 million, including parking, and the City Hall was a little over $70 million. But then they gave us an indication as well as what to bring back for the next meeting that was on the May 13th. And what we were, and through that study session, council decided to allocate $5 million for the library expansion, and so we've already started having a working group together with the library, the Cupertino Library Foundation. We have some representatives from the Library Commission, from the county, and other interested people that we're beginning to talk about how we expect to deliver that project and engage the public for the library expansion. But on the 18th, for the budget adoption, I believe that there is an expectation from our council that there's going to be some fundraising that's going to occur to help fill the gap for that project, because it is a $10.5 million project. What else we heard was for the McClellan Ranch Preserve Community Gardens, that before had been on the unfunded list. In a couple of years, it had been funded. We had done the design, and then it moved to unfunded, I think at mid-year last year. And council indicated a desire for that to move into a Category 1 project for next fiscal year. And so I'll have slides that talk about these projects specifically as I go on. And then the all-inclusive play area at Jollyman Park, moving it to a Category 1. So before that was a Category 4 project, and that's one where we're in line to get a significant grant from the county to build an all-inclusive play area there. And then subsequent to this meeting on May 13th, on the 21st, council affirmed that that location would be at Jollyman Park. There had been different conversations about Creekside and Jollyman, but that was firmed up on the 21st. Other direction we received was the solar electric vehicle charger project. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District had a very nice grant where they were going to have 75% funding for our project, and so we originally had proposed 4 sites, and it was like $875,000 or so. And then we learned that they had their criteria was changing, and our projects weren't as eligible as they had been in the past, unfortunately. And we were able to rescope the project to do it just at the sports center, and I think it was reduced to just a $20,000 grant at the sports center, but we, from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, but it was $100,000 from Silicon Valley Clean Energy. So it would significantly offset that price. So we repackaged that and did that for the solar EV charger. And then again, just getting into a longer-term CIP. So I can then just talk about the library expansion specifically. As I mentioned, it's I think I was saying a $10.5 million project, so a $10,050,000 project, and that includes parking. The parking is earmarked at $1.5 million for the parking. And one of the things when we had our kickoff meeting with the working group a few weeks back was, our goal is not to go into Library Field and just take the east side of that and put in, I think it was approximately 68 stalls. The first thing that we need to do is we want to freshen up the parking analysis that's been done at the Civic Center in general that happened back in 2015, because I know then it was identified roughly that we had about 40 deficient stalls in the Civic Center Plaza, and then the library expansion was going to then also create additional parking needs just based on the building code and the square footage. So one of the first scopes of work here will be to do that parking study and analysis, and just to know exactly what we have. Some will be attributable to the library expansion, other will just be just to the deficiencies of the plaza in general. And we talked about different ideas of how we could create additional parking stalls in the parking spaces that we already have. We may be able to, just reduce the widths of the existing stalls by 6 inches, and we'll grab some stalls there. We may be able to get up to 16 stalls just by going right here behind this building itself. We also looked at doing some work on Torrey to where we can make that potentially diagonal parking along Torrey and push the sidewalk in the middle of the grove. There's a double row of trees there, and push the sidewalk in between the trees and not disturb the trees themselves. And that would allow us to push the face of curb east on Torrey to where we could do more diagonal parking. We could do similar type of improvements on Pacifica. But the main thing is just us brainstorming through that and trying not to have impacts into Library Field, because green space is rare, and we don't want to lose it if we can find workable solutions for it. So here, then I mentioned the comparable costs, and the recommended project that also is to be determined. I mean, in 2015 through the we had Perkins and Will, the architect, and we had four different options that were considered back then. One was a west and an east expansion, and another one was to infill the existing courtyard in the library, and then the fourth option, which was the preferred alternative at the time, was to do what's called the Perched Addition, that sits atop the existing story room, the parameters of that was roughly 4,400 square feet of added space. I think it was 130 seat program room up above the story room. But again, there's a desire by this working group to really make sure that process was really well vetted, that all those options really had due consideration, and then maybe there's others that are out there. Here everything is still labeled as the perched expansion, but I mean, I think the takeaway is there's just a desire to have an expansion at the library, and we're going to be proceeding with a budget and design for next fiscal year. But it's not been set in stone yet. It's going to go through a process. Yeah, so I mentioned the parking. This would just give the commission a rough idea of the time frame that we would be looking at for the project. And I think just ultimately what design is determined is it's going to be determined through quite a bit of community input. So I mentioned the perched option. So about that's 8.5 million, and then the other $1.5 million is in the parking. So just let you know on that. And then on City Hall, as I mentioned, what staff was recommending was a $70 million project. That's what was desired. And all these options would require existing staff to be to leave the building and go into an interim City Hall. And we even discussed, and because we had done some analysis on where that could be, and it appeared that the Monte Vista Community Center it would need some improvements and cost to make that happen, but it could be a viable location for an interim City Hall. But we did discuss that if it wasn't a new City Hall, we could just do a renovation at $23 million, and that would really just give the existing building from the roof in would be new. That would cause the permit center would get relocated up to the main level, for example. We would probably gain maybe 10 or 15% additional usable space in the renovation, because many of you have been in the lobby or in the where our emergency operations center is, where the old chamber is, and there's just inefficient space there now, and so by just reorganizing the space, we could get maybe 10 or 15% there. It would replace the mechanical systems, but the downside of that particular option is while it would increase the usable space 10 or 15%, it really doesn't do much for us for the future, right? And our existing City Hall is about 24,000 square feet. The proposed new construction City Hall would be more like 40,000 square feet, with quite a bit of public space in there as well. So they're definitely not achieving the same things, and the costs show that. And then the last bullet on seismic and accessibility, that's just to go in there and do the seismic upgrades to build it up to bring the building up to current building codes seismically. As soon as you start to do a certain dollar amount of work in a building, that triggers accessible improvements as well. So things like I'm thinking like the elevator, different ramps and things like that. For sure the elevator. And then we would also be doing some of the electrical, mechanical type equipment, just the bare things that we'd have to do. But unfortunately, you'd move back into that building, and there'd really be no change to the occupants. Everything else, the cubicles would be in the same spot, the carpets would be the same, paint would be the same. It's just really doing a bare bones thing. And ultimately, what on May 13th, Council, we recommended that we wanted to look at this more in total, really be able to provide a full picture to our new council and come back in July, August timeframe. And so the City Hall discussion has really been tabled until later on, and is really just potentially following a separate track outside of the budget. in the staff report, we had identified a couple projects related to the city hall that depending on what happens in July or August, may or may not happen at all. So we just won't know on that. So that's the library and the city hall, the two large projects. Then the other projects that we had for next fiscal year, I mentioned the categories, and I'll go through category 1 first, is the all-inclusive play area at Jollyman, and then as soon as I get through this slide, then we'll go into each of these projects individually, so you'll see exactly how they're broken up. And I've mentioned the library expansions and its 2 projects, and the community gardens. The other is Quinlan Preschool Shade Structure. It's sort of where they run the preschool program there on the south of Christensen is where that's at. And then Rignart Road Improvements. So yeah, don't get this confused with Rignart Creek. This is Rignart Road going up into the hills. We had a slide there, it's been over 2 years ago. It's just a 2-lane road that serves a limited number of parcels, and we've got some instability up there on that hillside. And then through our building condition assessment, we identified the sports center is right up there with City Hall and needing some seismic retrofits. So this is the all-inclusive playground. I think just an example of a piece of playground equipment that is determined all-inclusive. But you can see there on the right the project costs, what the grant is, where the city's contribution is at the 1.2 million, and then what the goal is for donations for that particular project. I think I went over this early just because I'm excited to get working on this project. But again, these are things we want to really vet out what's available on site and keep that cost as low as we possibly can. And then the perched option, you can see where it's sitting there over the top of the story room. It's 4,400 square feet. You'd have, if our working group and the council, still arrives at something like this, you would be able to access it from the south side of the building. And then during certain hours, the library would staff people to receive people in from that side, or they would be able to come in from the front. I don't think it's the intention that it would be always accessible all the time from the south side. Then there'd be an elevator that would then take you up to the program room. That would be that's the 130 seats. That's atop of the story room. And then the community gardens. I don't know if any of you have been down to McClellan Ranch Preserve. The gardens had fallen into a state of really disrepair. They've right now there are no community gardens anymore in this down there, but there was a desire, and we had quite a bit of public input on April the 13th that was a needed project, and council agreed, made it a category 1. So we have a design on this project. And I can see that there's going to be quite a bit of effort to get that design as practical as possible. Try to get as much community volunteer type things going on as well to keep the cost down low. Then this is our smallest new project. It's at the Quinlan Community Center, as I mentioned. I think there's even going to be replacing some of the playground equipment, but the idea is not only just to replace this shade structure, but to make it quite a bit larger to where it covers more of that substantial area, because as you can imagine, in the summertime, those parts can get pretty hot on little hands. And then lastly is the Rignart Road Improvements. After we had that slide a couple of years ago, we had a geologist go through and just determine the stability all along through that creek. The road is in places pretty precarious next to the edge of the creek bank, and the creek banks are pretty steep. So this project addresses 2 locations that are classified more or less as eminent, that it could happen any time, and so it'll take care of that. And the solution is just to put in, it's called a stitch pier, where they drive in piers really close together to support this embankment. Oh, there was one more, forgot. And then this is the Sports Center Seismic Retrofit project, and the intentions with this is that we can go in, the design has been substantially complete on it, and we can go in and not affect the operations of the facility too much. I mean, we'll be there, but we're not going to be closing the facility down as we do the work. All right, so that was it for the Category 1 projects. And then, as I mentioned, these are just the ongoing projects that are multi-year funded. ADA improvements, you know, it's just that to resolve. We have an ADA transition plan that we refer to, and we just go through and a lot of times this will just complement another project, and we'll do work together to take care of an economy of scale. But that's proposed to be going forward. The bicycle wayfinding implementation, you know, that project has been designed. I think it's just really all that needs to be done is the signs made and erected at this point. And then street light installation, infill. In prior years, I think this had been at 30,000, Michael.
Yes.
And we've just been having more of an uptick of residents requesting. This is for where there's street lights not on a city street, and it's really driven by residents' request to have street lights installed. And so we evaluate that, and those have been increasing, not shrinking, and yet the cost of streetlights have been going up. So we're recommending that increase to $75,000 annually, at least until we can get through our backlog, because we've got about 5 years of backlog right now on these types of projects. So this just gives some examples of what we do, and the wayfinding signs. And everyone knows a streetlight. So these are the Category 4 projects. So these are projects with external funding. And as many of you may know, Apple has made an offer to donate, I think it's $9.775 million, and that's scheduled. A donation agreement is being negotiated here now, and I would anticipate that'll go to council probably in July, is my guess. So if those things happen, right? And there's also going to be some reprioritization of our bike plan that also will be around that time frame. But if it happens, these are projects that could occur, and so that's why we listed it in the staff report. So the Bub Road improvements, that would be from Stevens Creek Boulevard to the south up to Stevens Creek Boulevard to the north, and McClellan Road on the south. The Untitled Trail basic design, so that was brought up with the last applicant. This too is being offered for donation from Apple. This would begin at the Don Burnett Bridge at the end of Mary Avenue, and then it would wrap around, go across De Anza. It then proceeds to Wolf, towards where the public storage was at, and then it sweeps around and ends up at Valco Parkway. Is where Untitled Trail goes. We've done the feasibility study on it. That was approved by council recently. Then we have the Linda Vista Trail land donation. And I know that we inadvertently, we did not include that in the staff report.
Yeah, the staff report doesn't have any of these for.
It has all but the Linda Vista Trail.
But not in the Category 4. I think it's in the unfunded section for some reason.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I know it was listed in the staff report, but I know that Michael and I were going through this. The Linda Vista project, it just inadvertently was not included. But
Can we ask for some details on this one, or are we going to circle back to it in another way?
There's a slide coming up, and
So we'll see it again.
I'll give you everything I can. Yes.
Okay, so all of these we are going to get to see more detail
Well,
about.
we've covered categories 1, 2, and 3, so now we're on the last four, Category 4. That's right. So the Linda Vista Trail is up. It starts there off of McClellan near the McClellan Ranch Preserve, and then right there is the Rancho Deep Cliff, the golf course there, and it's really right adjacent to Stevens Creek, where McClellan Road crosses it right there. It's hard to see, but there's a maintenance or an access road there now, and then that road then connects all the way up to the backside of Linda Vista Park, and there's an individual who's offering that property to be donated, but they're interested in the city having a construction obligated by the end of this calendar year. So
I've been told by a resident that that property is worth something in this around maybe $78,000, and they're leveraging $2.2 million worth of city funds and putting a time limit on you.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I've heard those things, those same things. Yeah, and so those are things that council has to consider. You know, is it appropriate, or you know, will that opportunity come up in the future or not? I mean, there's things to think about. What as staff, what we want to do is just make sure that council's aware of the opportunity, and then they can go from there. But that would be an example. We talk about priorities of things. You know, these aren't high priority projects. If you were to look, you know, they may be noted in the bike plan or the PED plan, but that doesn't mean that they're tier 1. But then something comes up, and if council so directs, then they could be reprioritized higher. Mary Avenue Protected Bikeway, that would be from Stevens Creek Boulevard up to the Don Burnett Bridge. Then we had some others, McClellan Road Separated Bike Project. Oh, so also in the Apple donation, I think they had a variety of McClellan Road projects. I don't know if I'm seeing them all here. I thought it had totaled a little bit more than that, but you know, I mentioned the one that was there from Stelling west to Imperial. That's what's going on now. But they also offered to assist in the cost to get it all the way up to here to Torrey. Also was the school walk audit implementation. There was quite a few sites there. There was over 70 sites that is also pending that donation. And then I've already covered the solar EV chargers that we're proposing. So I'll go over each one of these now. So I mentioned this. It's at the sports center, and you can see with the BACMED and the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Grant there. These are a little bit unique in that they don't connect to the grid at all. They connect to the building, and when the more vehicles that are plugged in, they each just get a little bit less available energy, because there's only so much that's being generated by the panels. But then when the need of the cars is less than what the panels are producing, then the difference goes to the building. So it can offset the operational costs of the building. And it's, like I said, it's not connected to the grid. And you know, I don't even know if it's been determined if we would be charging for these at this current time. It would just be something that would be a nice amenity for users of the facility, but they could also be metered and charged.
So
we didn't have.
Is the expectation that they not be connected to the grid a part of the proposal, the funding?
No, I'm sorry. I was listening to him in one ear.
Yeah, in this case, the reason we are not going to connect it to the grid is because of that's the terms of the funding, or is it just a choice we are trying to make? I'm just wondering that if you're actually adding charging points and if it's a cloudy day, then nobody can use them. So
I think it's a choice at the current time, but we did check in to say, is there another, you know, if we were to do it, structure it differently, would we be qualified to receive different, you know, more grants or something like that? We didn't hear that it would make them any more eligible. So
but
I think it was
unlikely to make them ineligible. Wasn't the question.
It didn't make them more eligible if we say we're charging dollars or anything like that. I think I may have deleted it. I want to show you those. Did you find those slides?
Yeah, they're hidden.
Oh, okay. Let us get those slides for you. I think we meant to have them right there. Because I want to show you the rest of the Category 4 projects. Yeah, okay, thank you. Let's see if there's any more. Okay, so go up to where it started. Yeah, there we go. All right. Thank you for that. So this would be the Bub Road Improvements, as I mentioned, Stevens Creek down to McClellan. It would be separated bikeway projects. This is a Class 4 bike lane where you'd have a physical separation between the cars and the bicycles, similar to what we're doing on McClellan right now.
Would it be a cement curb like that, or
it would,
or
yeah.
post? Okay.
Yeah, we're in the process of constructing that now. And then the Uniparcera, as I mentioned, from the Don Burnett Trailhead all the way over to Valco Parkway. This, there's different options of how to get across De Anza Boulevard, because that's a very challenging location there. You've got the off ramp, you've got the on ramp, you've got a wide road right adjacent to 280. If we crossed Surface Street at the surface, we'd have to do some lane widening and lane improvements on the on and off ramps. We know that there'd be some cost to it, but that would be the lowest cost to do that and do a surface improvements and have a button that someone could press to make sure that bicyclists and pedestrians could get across that road. But it wouldn't be the smoothest way to have a trail, because there'd be an interruption in getting across De Anza. But it can be done. So when we brought the feasibility study to council, we also discussed the possibility of a tunnel, because with enough money you can do anything, but it is expensive to do the tunnel, and there are some concerns about conflicts with a gas line there. And then there was also the discussion of a bridge. You could have a bridge over it, and what we heard was consensus that the aesthetics of having a bridge there just weren't desirable. So it seemed like the tunnel, which of course is the more costlier of the three, was something that will likely, if we do move into, where, like I said, the feasibility stopped, we're not proposing this design. If it is funded, is for a surface. It will only do a set of surface street, because a tunnel would cost even more to design. But that's what this does. And here, because this is a V ditch and the width, it was even discussed that a large portion of this trail, for it to be, a desirable trail and to be feasible, would likely be put into a box culvert, and the trail would actually go up above, on top of where you see the V ditch now.
On this item, I think it might help to clarify things if it, instead of saying, bless you, estimated project cost, that it said estimated project design cost, because it looks a little deceptive, like it only costs $1.8 million to build the whole thing. But is this saying that it's $1.8 million to design it? Is that right?
Yeah, that's to do that. I mean, at the top it says basic design and then a description, but we could add that in there again to make sure there's not a, yeah. Okay.
Does that seem like a lot? $1.8 million to design that?
Not in the valley.
Yeah.
Not at that location.
Yeah.
I think in the context, in the packet that we received, that was the first of 5 different segments. So it kind of makes sense when you see it. I would agree that clarification is probably useful.
Okay.
I think the full picture, or maybe the horror, emerges when you look through those adjacent pages. Because I think that the bridge, the tunnel, was like $20 million or something, right? So.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. Yeah.
On that topic, does this 1.8 million, is that including the tunnel design?
No, this is a surface street design only at that amount. Now, before we would proceed with the design, of course, we would ask council. We'd talk about the alternatives and how they would want us to proceed. But in terms of what Apple has offered to date, is this dollar amount.
So, is there a total of this entire Uniparcera trail somewhere that says all the design from one end to the other costs this much, and it's going to cost this much to construct with the tunnel, rather than seeing it broken up? Because that was one of the problems I've had throughout this whole, I put this on a spreadsheet, I worked on it over the weekend, and everything is, not everything, but many things are broken into small pieces, and then I tried to track from previous years to this year, and things look like the money moved, and I can't follow. So with this one project, I would like to see, design cost, and it can be broken out, but then it needs to be totaled, doing the spreadsheet, design and then the construction, and perhaps the options there, it might help.
Okay. Yeah, in the feasibility study, we have all those options laid out in detail to what we thought the probable cost was with the information that we knew at the time. So are you thinking, Kitty, that it would be good just to show those different options here as just information? So there's sort of a legacy of what's going on?
So I see this as kind of a challenge, what we're doing here, because we're not prioritizing. And I did look up, for instance, San Diego has a council policy for prioritizing their projects, which I thought was something that our city council probably would want to adopt, so that a garden doesn't take priority over a retaining wall that's crumbling, perhaps, and they take care of those issues there. And then because we are doing this consistency analysis, I was looking at San Clemente's Planning Commission, and they did a consistency analysis and tabulated it, their items in a pretty simple way, and just putting, here's, like here, you've got your senior center expansion, and then you would have your general plan, policy, goal, or strategy listed beside it, and whether or not it met those items. Something like that. I think where it gets confusing is that we're looking at all of these dollar values and items that were given to city council to work on their budget, and we're not working on budget, we're working on consistency. So I think the material needs to be given to us in a way just to, stick with a consistency issue. We don't, it's not up to us to prioritize these items, and perhaps even the ones that are further down the road, that if they're that far in the horizon, do we need to be looking at those now? Those kinds of questions all came into my mind about how to get this to us. So, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on, the dollar values and things like that, if what I'm really here for is to say something else. Okay.
Actually,
Did you look at attachment 4? Because I think that follows that format to an extent, but you're saying it's not in-depth enough, or?
It was a little confusing, how does that document follow along to the 113-page document, which I tabulated all out and was looking at the dollar values and then seeing the issues with items.
Right, but you didn't want to look at the dollar values, I thought you just said.
When I started looking at it, I was like, oh, they've handed me dollar values. That must be important.
Right.
Okay, and then I dig into it more, and it's like, well, this is really a consistency analysis.
Right.
And I think that, for new commissioners, that we should be educated, for what our role is on the CIP.
maybe just to clarify with staff, we're going a little out of order here.
Yeah.
But, we're not here to make a judgment on the dollar values. Just to be sure, we're really looking at consistency with the general plan.
That's
Right,
correct.
which I believe is summarized in the staff report.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. There's really just a few more slides. This is the Linda Vista Trail we talked about earlier, and where it connects. So council will consider whether that's going to be a viable project. As I mentioned, we inadvertently did not include that in the staff report. So if by some chance it does get legs, we would come back. And I think as well, if they were to give us direction to rebuild the city hall, I could see us coming back, because we just don't have that in this general plan right now. And then Mary Avenue protected bikeways, there it is there. You note that the cost is quite a bit less, so it's not going to be quite as robust as what we showed there on Bub Road.
So just a question specifically about that project. That doesn't include any resurfacing then? Sounds like at 165K, it's just putting up, because that pavement's not great, just so you know.
Oh, I'm the pavement guy, I know, yeah. Yeah, we've stayed away from that, waiting to see what's going to be happening with the Oaks, and then, well, I could give you a lot of reasons, but yeah.
Just curious.
Yep. Wolf Road is right in there too, for other reasons. And so this is the different phases of McClellan Road. This is the intersection Yeah, that's what threw me in the earlier slide. So this is the intersection here. So at McClellan and De Anza, we've got that offset intersection, trying to straighten that out. And then this is the last phase from Imperial to Byrne over there near the high school to finish that out. And it's the last phase just because we've had some challenges in just acquiring the right of way through there. And then the school walk audit implementation, I believe there's over 70 sites, working with each of the CUSD, mainly those schools, but doing things to improve pedestrian and bicycle safety at the school sites. And then, this is where, you get into the unfunded projects, which I won't go into, but that's what really populates the 113-page document you're talking about of the things that we would desire. And when you put it alphabetized, it's the aquatic facility is right there at the beginning. So with that, I'd be happy to have any questions.
Commissioners, thank you for the presentation.
Well, I guess I'll kick off a few comments. So one of the things, the packet that we received is a little bit different than what you have here. So I had a few comments. I guess I had a few comments on that. There was a discussion about different alternatives for the library parking. They seem to carry the same number of dollars, but what you're talking about currently is not trying to surface part of the.
I think if we do find ourselves in library field, it's just because we just exhausted all other possibilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but what, the kinds of things you were talking about, making modifications on Torrey, that would be more expensive than the $1.5 million for library field, right?
Yeah, we've not done. We don't know. We're going to first just make sure it's feasible to do it and how many stalls we would get out of it. But,
okay. So that's a placeholder. As I brought up before, we're not concerned about the dollars so much here today.
Yeah. There's going to be some parking improvements here as the library expansion proceeds.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, you made an unusual comment on the streetlight infill coverage, that was on locations that were not city streets that were being requested? Is that?
No, on city streets.
On city streets, okay.
Yes.
Good.
No, don't let me get anywhere else.
Yeah, because that's what I also heard.
Yeah, I think.
I must have said it. No, this is strictly on city streets.
All right.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there's a 5-year backlog for that.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we're recommending it to be increased. Yeah.
And I think the allocation is like a couple of $100,000 per year.
Well, we're recommending $75,000. It had been $30,000 a year. Right.
So that was just, you're kind of, rather than identifying the full scope, there's just kind of an ongoing CIP dollars being funding that.
That's right. Because
Okay.
the requests, they don't come in a predictable way. But we just know we have a backlog, and we don't like to have these things, people hear the same reasons year after year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. I was wondering why can't we just go through the backlog once because it's not a huge amount given the entire city budget. And that's something which bothers people a lot. It's a safety concern. It's a concern which affects traffic and everything. Yeah. Just food for thought, but we can move on.
So I completely agree with Commissioner Saxena here. I think if you identify, if it's $70,000, which you intend to spend kind of every year, then there's the interesting question of, having a $350,000 project, which is a multi-year, in your group 2, that may be a better way for people to visualize what's happening.
Yeah. No, I like how you think. We could clear it all out one year, and then, because how we'd been doing it, we weren't having a project every year, unless it was just a onesie twosie kinds of a thing. But like we were doing a project up on Randy and Larry, that had no street lights, and that's, I think we're putting in how many street lights there?
7.
Yeah, 7, and so that was relatively expensive, and so it used a couple years' budget just in one, just on those 2 streets. So, yeah, no, I'll think about what you're saying.
Thank you. I had a very general education question. I was looking at the Perch library thing and the cost, and it looks like it's about $2,000 per square foot to do the extension.
Yes, 1,900 and change. It's a lot of dollars.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, why is it so expensive?
Well, that's an all-in cost. So all the soft cost contingencies, everything are in there. It's not in the most convenient location, being perched on top of the existing story room. You know, I think that it's a rightful question, because people want to make sure that it's being, you know, designed right and it's practical. When we looked at the costs that the city of Morgan Hill incurred, I think they had gone up to over, I think over 13. They're estimating now. How much do you recall? I think it was like $1,300 or $1,400 a square foot, and theirs is not. It's single story. You know, not an unusual site that they're doing it on. From the first bid, from the bids that they had, and they rejected and they rescoped it. You know, I think it's what our challenge is we want to deliver, you know, the lowest cost project we can, but we also have to be cognizant of just the different soft costs that go into a project. And so I think it's ours to make sure that we do estimate it correctly. In fact, what we're considering here is once we do arrive at the preferred design, that we solicit and retain an estimator just for that project, and they just estimate that project. It's not the architect, it's not the engineer. It's just we bring in a third-party estimator to validate exactly what they think the costs are in today's market.
Thank you.
I'd like to address our attorney about the fact that we have issues with the parks added in to this CIP from the Cupertino Municipal Code 1992-040 regarding the park master plan. And this was directed to our city attorney, and then I got a response back about this, which I'll also share. But for the parks master plan, it says, prior to submitting its recommendation to City Council, the Parks and Recreation Commission shall submit the proposal to the Planning Commission for its recommendation to include an environmental assessment of the plans and a finding that the proposal is consistent with the general plan. So that I found curious because it's already been marched up to City Council, and we did not make findings when we reviewed it, the master plan. And then I did get a response back, and it's a little confusing, but I'll, is it all right if I just read what she replied? Or?
That's fine. I'm not in the position to give you a different answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
so
it's okay to share?
It's okay to share.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so Chapter 19.02 applies to land zoned as park and recreation. Section 19.92020 provides that no building, structure, or land shall be used, and no building or structure shall be erected in a park and recreation zone otherwise than in conformance with the provisions of this chapter. Section 1992-040 Park Master Plan in turn requires the Director of Parks to submit development plans for any proposed park or recreation facility to the Parks and Recreation Commission, and then to the Planning Commission for general plan consistency consideration. Accordingly, I, our city attorney, interpret section 1992-040 as requiring a master plan detailing how a specific park will be used and developed prior to any construction work being done or the park being open to the public. That section does not require submission of the citywide Parks and Recreation Master Plan to the Planning Commission for general plan conformity findings. The citywide Parks Master Plan is a higher level policy document. Unlike the Parks Master Plan, state law requires the CIP to go to the PC for consistency findings, and the CIP includes specific projects on a more detailed level. So what's interesting about that is that we do need to do the consistency finding on the parks plan, but we don't, it doesn't sound like we're reviewing the parks plan and making findings, as I understand this response. So we do need to now circle back to doing our consistency findings, but all of the issues that are brought up in the in the chapter for parks and recreation in the general plan, those items need to be discussed, and that includes parkland equity and where the money is being spent, where has it been spent in the past, what's our history that we have, because in order to we're going to be making findings. In order to do that, we need to have information which I'm not sure that that we have clearly mapped out, so that we can say, yes or no, and about where we've been financially, where we've been spending the money financially, and where we're headed.
I'm unclear whether there's a question for me, or you've gotten a written statement from the city attorney. I'm the deputy city attorney. I stand by the city attorney's written opinion to you.
That's fine. We need to do the consistency analysis. So whether we needed to make findings before it went to the city council it doesn't really matter. We're still getting to the same point. But I wanted to bring this up that we do have an item in the municipal code regarding the parks master plan.
I think so maybe I'm directing this to the city attorney. The master plan calls out future use of the park space, but there actually needs to be a project approval for those to move forward, and that would at that point come to the planning commission. So if, for instance, we'll use the aquatic center as the example. If a location were cited for the aquatic center and it was chosen to be in an area which is currently designated as P zoning, park zoning, then we would actually have a hearing for that to approve that, both the consistency with the general plan and to meet our, but we don't do that on the master plan.
Right, and that was the one thing I would point out is I believe the staff report actually gets to that point, that all of these projects will at some point be brought forward at project level and will receive the appropriate review at that time.
Right. And that will, that would be at the point after the dollars are attached and the dollars attached to the specific, here are the plans, and this is actually, in my prior time on the Parks and Rec Commission, this actually had come up as part of the discussion around, if the clubhouse at the golf course at Blackberry Farm were to change, that was actually something that was going to have to go to the Planning Commission for approval once there are plans. Just like anything else.
What's kind of odd about this is that we're having to make a consistency finding on all of these items, and it seems like we're sort of doing it before the fact, and then eventually we're going to end up doing it again, if I'm understanding it correctly.
I think the requirement is when there's sufficient detail or greater detail. There's definitely CIP dollars that are being spent on the park system master plan, right? But that is not approving the projects that's identifying as future potential projects. It is just doing the plan, just as we would also approve CIP dollars for, design of a path.
I think we're saying the same thing. We are doing consistency analysis and we're doing it because of state law.
I think I'm not sure whether we're agreeing or not, because I think that there is an analysis that money will be spent on the master plan that's different than saying that we're approving the dollars being spent, being spent on that action. So for instance, in the unfunded area, there were a number of Jollyman Park improvements, right? And those are quite specific, but they're also unfunded and not, it's not an approved project at this point. So at that point in time, when that starts to move forward, Public Works will bring that forward. Council will say, here are the dollars to go design that. At that point, that design would come back, I think, through here. It might not in that case, because you're talking about a pathway. But I think that I don't think we're missing. I don't think you want to try to judge the consistency of the details of something which has not been approved yet.
And the state code talks about your finding or not finding the conformity of the comprehensive CIP with the general plan. This is not a project level review. That will be conducted at a later stage. Yeah.
Commissioner Moore, from the point of view of this meeting, are you concerned about anything in this motion which we should think deeply about?
I think, why don't I just share the San Clemente Planning Commission document that they did for their general plan consistency findings, and then maybe that will illustrate where the issue lies.
Okay, so, okay.
And can this be zoomed out? Is that working correctly? Okay, so what I liked about their Planning Commission staff report, for one, all the documents flowed from one to the next, and so they give you a nice subject and background. Their project description, and then explanation of environmental review and compliance. And then their staff recommendation and with the attachments.
Could we zoom out a bit? So that
Zoom
we can,
out?
because
I'll need help.
We're not seeing everything.
Oh, I'm sorry. How about that?
Yeah, this is
Better? Okay. So there's your staff recommendation, and then your attachments. You've got the resolution, and then their project sheets. And we'll get to that. So looking here, this is the resolution that they have written up. And they're saying that it's categorically exempt. It seems like they have a slightly different reason, but I'm not entirely sure about that. And then they go over their general plan consistency, and they say, you know, here are the policies which they're consistent with. And here's another page of all the policies that they're consistent with. And yet another. And their final page. And then here is how they show their plan consistency for each different project that they're doing. And I like how they have a project category. They say which departments work on it, project title, a description, the policies in the general plan, and they tell you very simply yes or no if it's consistent. And then they have some notes. There's one page of that. And here's another project category. This is kind of interesting. They have sewer in here also. I don't know that we have much of that. And then we have several streets as well, but they've got their engineering division, and general plan policies, and consistency. And then they follow it up with some simple maps for each project and their cost amount. And this is a 5-year program that they did.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore, for that detailed study.
Okay, so the difference is that in our agenda packet is that we've got maybe 5 different documents. One of them is the 113-page one, which is showing things that may not happen. It's a wish list. And then we have an attachment which has some consistency findings. However, it's not written into the actual resolution that we would be signing, so I liked that it was in the resolution. And just format-wise, I would have liked to have seen the single document from start to finish, like I just showed.
I mean, at least I found it much easier to understand than what we have right now. But I don't know if other commissioners have had a view on this, on what Commissioner Moore presented us now.
I think that we're certainly organized differently. The thing that you see in the big packet, the overview, is that you can see the progression of projects from previous years, which is something that that actually has some value. So there were a number of projects which I went back to look at how the costing had changed as they were tracking this across time. I think that the staff report actually did categorize many of the actions in terms of directly which general plan goals they were hitting on. So I think we actually have that captured as well. The one thing that did make this maybe a little challenging is that we didn't have the presentation you gave today, which actually shows the kind of final things that advanced forward. And I think that, there is some confusion maybe on that part. The big packet that we had has some information that's different than what was in your presentation. And I don't think we have that presentation in that form, which basically shows the evolution of the things that moved up. So for instance, I made notations. I made a number of notations on items that were in the big report. The comment I would have about library field, about library parking in library field, is different based on the presentation we got today than what I would have seen from the packet. So, I think that's
Right.
It's difficult to be that timely.
And some of that was evolving while we
Yeah,
were
from
getting this
1 week ago.
report written, right? But in the staff report, I mean, all the projects here beginning on page 2 were under analysis and general plan consistency, and all the bullets through here. I mean, these are the projects that I've been describing in more detail.
For the point of view of the agenda item, where we are supposed to evaluate the consistency with the general plan. If I hear you correctly, Commissioner Moore, you feel that the way the system is organized, you don't feel you have the information presented in a manner where you can evaluate that.
Correct. I'd also like to, I guess, re-enter the information that I provided for the previous agenda item regarding the environmental impact report, and that is in, may I see that? Thank you. Okay, so, and I don't think we need to go through the whole thing, but from the environmental impact report we saw from the Valco special area specific plan from last year is that you've got air quality issues along the freeway, you've got the noise corridors, and we have a general plan land use compatibility for community noise environments, and that impacts your Junipero Serra Trail, which you're looking at the feasibility of. And so this, rather specifically seems to have some issues.
May I ask what the status is of the Valco specific plan? So my understanding is it's rescinded. Is that correct?
The EIR, it was not
The specific plan?
for the specific plan.
Yeah, so the specific plan is no longer part of the city's general plan, is that right? Right, I'm getting a nod, yeah.
Right,
So-
but we have a certified EIR.
The approvals, as I understand, were rescinded, which includes the certification of the EIR.
Are you suggesting the EIR no longer exists? Somehow that it's
If I'm understanding
it's
what
gone?
you're saying is that the Valco specific plan is part of the general plan, and therefore the CIP must be reviewed for consistency with the Valco specific plan. That is not the case to the extent the specific plan was rescinded.
Could you repeat that? Try to simplify it a little bit.
Was the specific plan rescinded at a recent council action?
The specific plan was rescinded.
Yeah, so the plan would not contain policies against which the CIP should be reviewed tonight.
Okay, so the point of this is that you have an air quality issue along the freeway, and you have noise along the freeway, and you have noise and air quality levels, screening levels, if you were, thresholds that you need to meet. That's the point. It's not whether or not, going by Valco there's an issue, although you could infer that there is, but I
So
wasn't
then
going that way.
The commission's task tonight would be to decide whether the issues that you're raising are contained within general plan policies that the CIP is being reviewed against.
Yeah, I presume the EIR was trying to confirm with the general plan.
Well,
Right.
but actually, if I could ask a clarification, none of the projects we're considering in the CIP plan are within the Valco specific plan area. Is that correct?
I think the trail is what Commissioner Moore is talking about.
You would potentially have I think the Junipero Serra might be the one that's on
So
here.
the one segment of the Unipero
Yeah.
Serra that,
But I think the other thing to note, and it's referenced into the staff report, that each project does get evaluated on its own environmental assessment. So really what we're looking for is essentially, yes, these projects are consistent with the general plan. If, to Commissioner Moore's point, there is an environmental impact or certain analysis that needs to be done, then that project will do that analysis. So it's not just like, oh, go ahead. It's, for instance, hypothetically, Junipero Serra has noise or air quality impacts. That project would be required to do its own environmental analysis to review those types of things as part of it. That's something to keep in mind.
Additionally, we have how are we going to make a determination about parkland equity, and are we meeting the 3 acres per 1,000 residents? Where has the money gone in Parks and Recreation? I don't have a way to evaluate that.
So I can't speak to that, the money portion of it. Kind of what we're really focused on is the projects listed in the capital improvement program. Are they consistent with the goals and policies within the general plan? So that's kind of what the staff report's getting at. And I think attachment 4, the general plan consistency notes for file numbers CP, first year program. That's what we're trying to get at. For instance, ADA improvements are consistent with the general plan. Goal M-2 to promote improvements to city streets that safely accommodate all transportation modes and persons of all abilities. So something like that. That's really what we're focused on, not necessarily the monies of it. I get your point, and I understand that, but what we're looking for is overall consistency with the general plan and how those programs, policies, and what have you are consistent with the CIP.
Well, there are other items to be consistent with in the general plan, which would include the community noise environments and equity, and I didn't find that those policies and goals and strategies were included.
Were there specific, is the Junipero Serra Trail because the rest of the elements I don't see necessarily having an impact to current park areas, size. They mostly map to access and, we got to do the public comments still.
Okay, we have a few requests from the public, and while we're in deliberations, we could actually call them and then continue after that. Peggy Griffin?
Thank you, commissioners and staff. I guess I'm finding this whole thing kind of really confusing. I can't tell what projects are really being considered and have had money allocated to them, and how much of that money is for 1 year versus 5 years. And I live by the Junipero Serra Trail, and I'm excited about it, but I also know that the noise level has increased significantly since they measured before. And I know that I keep all my windows closed because the black particles that come from the freeway get all over our bedding and all over our patio. And thinking about someone running and breathing and babies and strollers, I really think you can't really say that you can exempt it from CEQA. It sounds like you're exempting all these projects from CEQA. Maybe the wording ought to be different than in the resolution to make it clear, because this is really seems kind of muddled. The flow of the projects and the approvals and the allocation of money doesn't seem to be flowing smoothly. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Another Griffin. Good evening, Planning Commission. I was at the City Council when they were, I followed this through the whole way, the CIP, et cetera, and I just wanted to put in a word about the Stockelmeyer Farm. I have been coming to the City Council meetings for many, many years, and I remember when the Stockelmeyer property was purchased, and then there was a great deal of interest in preserving the orchard. This was probably 15 years ago. And there has been talk on and off about the house. And I think, I didn't really know that much about the Stockelmeyer property. I used to look at it when I was riding the bus to San Jose State, and you can get a really good, when you're sitting up high in a bus coming down Hoo-Hoo Hill there, coming right past the property, you can actually see in, and I used to see the fish ponds, et cetera. And I really wondered about the property. Well, now that I know more about the property and some of the history, and there was the house was from 1910, 1920. Family had been raised there. It's adjacent to Elijah Stevens' area where he lived in the 1800s. I'd really like to know more about Mr. Stockelmeyer and the family. I consider Mr. Stockelmeyer, I believe that he was in education, and I think he was one of the founders of Cupertino. I'd like to know more about his history. He has a prominent, he's a prominent person in Cupertino history, just as Elijah Stevens and some other illustrious people. And I would like to know more about the property. Why do we have it? Why did we purchase it? It's sitting there. The house is there. There were plans at some point to have a legacy farm. I have been in the Smith home in Los Altos, which is adjacent to the history, that's essentially the history house for Los Altos. And it's pretty much 1920, 1930, orchard family, et cetera, et cetera. Why aren't we doing the same thing? Why don't we have this lovely property with an orchard on it. Why did Mr. Stockelmeyer decide to put an orange orchard there? What happened on the property in 1910? Who owned it before him? Did they ever have orchards there? What's the status of the house? What did he do? I mean, this man helped at the time that Cupertino was incorporated. I consider him a very, very important figure in the history of Cupertino, and I would like to honor his memory by having his, I'm going to call it farm. It's a farm of the 21st century. Elijah Stevens was the 1800s. Adjacent to this is Mr. Stockelmeyer's farm. Let's preserve it and have a history house like the Smith home in Los Altos. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa Warren.
Hi, thanks. So first I just want to make a statement. I'm glad there's been you've done your homework and you have good questions and you have good comments. And I appreciate that Commissioner Moore asks tough questions that would make her feel more comfortable about her task. She takes her task very seriously. I'm not saying the rest of you don't, but she's usually the one that's vocalizing concerns about process, perhaps. And it's not an easy job for staff, I know, to do this. And if you're in a pattern of doing it a certain way, but I think it's wise to at least consider what she's pointing out and figure out what works best for everyone that's got to do this. Because we're all in this together, you guys more than me. So that's just one comment. And then I was at a public meeting, we'll call it, gathering, where a resident was very upset about, so Linda Vista Trail was part of this, and you kind of skimmed over it. I don't know if that means that it's sort of been put on the back burner or what that meant. They were very upset, how can the city not take this land donation? What's wrong with them? What is this, blah, blah, blah. That particular person, over reading things, fake news, we'll call it, had no idea that accepting that loan donation and doing what was being required by the donator would cost the city $2.2 million. As soon as he heard that, he was shocked and he changed his tune. I have learned that the mystery donor is a resident, but that resident hasn't owned the property very long, approximately a year. I don't know how long the discussion's been going on with the city about the donation of this land, but to me, if a person knew or was orchestrating purchase of a piece of land like that they knew would be valuable and appreciated by the city, why wasn't there just this, I wonder why there wasn't a discussion, hey, guess what, city? I've been talking to this landowner, they're willing to sell this property, think of what you can do with it, why don't you buy it? Because I know the price tag for that piece of property was very low compared to $2.2 million to develop it the way it's wanting to be developed. And it just makes me question what the motivation of this donation is with the threat of taking it away if it's not done in a period of time. And that comes to council very surprisingly, but clearly staff had been talking to this person about it. It's just, the optics are not good. And if the opportunity of the city to purchase it on their own and own it, then they could decide on their own terms when and what to do with it. So that's my comment about that.
Thank you, Lisa. Mm-hmm. And Chairman Wong had just texted me to let him know that he has been able to get out of his garage, but he won't be able to make it to the meeting today. So, all right. So we can now go back to our meetings. Item number 4. We were deliberating about whether the information we have is enough and sufficient for us to make the call that all the CIP programs are in agreement with the city's general plan. And is there something more which any of the commissioners want to add here?
Well, I think that we have sufficient information to make that decision. We can also do that piecewise, if there is a reason for that. We can talk about specifics, specific issues. I mean, I'll go ahead and say I think the only major issue that I raised. I mean, there were a number of kind of potentially typo kinds of things that would just be cleanup for the next step in its presentation. The only issue that I really would raise for general plan consistency was around the, and this has been raised before, about the library parking in library field issue, because that does involve, effectively a reduction of the open space. Now that is, converting from kind of recreational open space use to supporting a public structure. That's the only one I think I would raise issue with. Otherwise, I think, in the under the constraints that we're supposed to be looking at these issues, I don't really have a problem with anything else on the CIP plan. If we really want to raise an issue with regard to Universal, I believe that would be the only one that I think would be impacted by concerns about 280. And these are actually, the 280 concerns are actually in the reverse, that you're protecting the people who are using the path. You know, that mitigations would be taken to, protect the people who are using the path, not to make the freeway go away. We can pull that out. You can pull that out and give it a separate treatment. I have no problem with that.
So what you're suggesting is that of all the items presented, we remove those two and consider everything else?
Sure. I mean, we should discuss.
Okay.
Yeah, especially with regard to the library, given, I think what I heard from staff was the impact is really not yet fully understood, so we really don't know, and therefore, if we don't know, how do we say it is compliant with the general plan? If indeed the conclusion is you have to take so many square feet of parkland and convert it to parking lot. So
yeah, so my concern would be that particular alternative. When you're looking at other alternatives,
Right.
which may be modification on Torrey or
right, or
finding
parking
some
back here.
Yeah, then that would that would not be an issue
Right.
around general plan. Then it just becomes a matter of dollars and feasibility.
Right, and then, so I think the Unipacero Trail is probably the other one that we probably need to discuss more with regard to, can we get this to pass with that in, or do we need to take it out to pass everything else, right? And so I think that's probably a point of discussion to reach a conclusion as to, do a majority of us want it out or in? With regard to our approval, specifically the CEQA's exemption, anyway, that's my thought.
Well,
Thank you.
but again, the decision we're making is that these that we're advancing this CIP without specific CEQA analysis. However, the individual projects would have to go through CEQA, CEQA compliance, whether that's initial study mitigated, mitigated, or whether they have to go through a full EIR. That will all depend on the specific project when that were to come forward. So I don't think the CEQA exemption is actually is a major concern.
Yeah, I think it's the compliance with the plan. Commissioner Moore?
We still don't have information to determine if there is equity in where this funding is going across the city. In fact, the top item is Jollyman Park, and then also on this side, the west side, you've got garden improvements. So right there, you've got 5.5 and another 1.5 million. So you're at 7 million. And it pretty much continues like that. And that's why I was asking what the funding has been like in the past years as well, because there have been other improvements. For instance, Blackberry Farm seems to be getting funding dollars very, very regularly. And same with McClellan Ranch. So in the absence of having data to evaluate if equity is actually occurring, how do we know that it is?
So when it comes to equity of spending, do you feel that is something which can be linked to the consistency of the general plan or consistency with the general plan?
Yes, especially when these are recreation areas and you're supposed to be providing those, equitably across the city. How are you going to determine if that's happening? We need to have some information about that. And also, I think you start opening a can of worms if you remove a certain item out of here, because while we're here to check on consistency, the city council is looking at it in a, dollars and cents way. They know how much money they've got, and they're deciding where they're going to be spending. So if we remove things, we then are tinkering with the whole system, and I don't I don't know that that's a good idea.
So it seems while two of the commissioners here are comfortable with removing, but Commissioner Moore has some concerns about the whole equity, how the money on the parks is being spent, and she would rather have more information to decide whether it's equitable, which she links to the compliance with the general plan.
Parks and the trails
Parks
too.
and trails, okay.
Right, as one of our residents just mentioned, you know, that's another trail going in on the west side with this financial leverage.
Okay, Commissioner Takahashi, do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I mean, if Commissioner Moore, well, there's two ways we can go here. We can request more information and move it to another meeting, or we can just vote on it, and it'll either pass or not pass.
Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, it's a tough one, you know, the way that there's certainly going to be an issue. You know, the CIP represents the opportunities to work on projects and to advance them for further consideration. So it may be unfortunate that the distribution is not equitable. It is a general plan goal, and one that I think that Parks and Recs takes, I don't know if they're called Parks and Recs or Rec and Community Services today, but that department takes very seriously about trying to address the issue of equity.
Mm-hmm.
They're also very seriously, you know, they have equal, you know, kind of co-equal with their goal for, you know, for trying to have equitable distribution and a certain amount of distribution. They have very high priorities for things like improving connectivity, which is reflected in the, you know, the trail efforts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's clearly, there was actually a question, it was a very good question. Jennifer raised a question about the Stocklemire House, and that actually was part of a plan that was moving forward, whether that, you know, and there were lots of discussions about what might happen there, which got basically tabled because there was I think a very fair question about citywide, what are we trying to do, right? And how do we make sure that we're approaching that in the proper way? So, you know, I think in that respect, you know, in the short term, when you're talking about a year or talking about 2 years, these are the opportunities that are presented, and that's why they're getting this consideration day. So I understand the concern, but I think that you know, again, all these things have to go through. All these things will have to go through a further approval phase to get, you know, at the council and probably here as well, you know, before the all-inclusive park at Jollyman Park can be built. It really will come back.
Yeah.
And then the question of equity can be addressed.
Right, I don't think, I mean, a lot of these are just ongoing connectivity and safety and ADA, so, I mean, a majority of these are actually not necessarily, but the ones that I think we're concerned about will.
Well,
So-
and if you don't mind, when I started the presentation, I discussed how different projects, many of them go through a master plan process, and they get categorized that way. So like the bicycle plan or the bike plan, and they get tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 projects. That went through a very comprehensive vetting process to get to those priorities. And when we're looking at consistency on 1 year, 1 year we may be at Jollyman. Next year we may be at Memorial Park if we can get a specific plan for Memorial Park. And if you just look at 1 year at a time and saying, are you actively doing all the parks in the city that year? That's difficult. And I mean, that's part of what a master plan process helps to try to level out, perhaps.
I think the concern with Commissioner Moore has that, as she mentioned, was that we don't really have that history to evaluate that equitable distribution. And there are concerns which residents have raised that they feel that it probably could be done better than what it was before.
Is there something specific in the general plan that points to this, that says that this equity needs to be evaluated every year like this?
First, I've been a resident here since 1995, and I'm on the east side of Cupertino. And the increase in density has all gone to the east side, and we continue to see that happening. And yes, you do have an obligation to have parkland equity. You're supposed to have 3 acres per 1,000 residents. And as you continue to increase the density on the east side of Cupertino, the numbers keep going down. It keeps getting worse. And then what you end up with is having the parks that you do have on the west portion of the city getting the lion's share of the Parks and Recreation funding by the simple virtue of the fact that they have parks that can be fixed up, and we don't. So I would need more information, and I would like to see it presented in some fashion similar to the information that I shared, so that I can look at it and make an evaluation. So with regards to parkland equity, I think you could go back for several years and point at how the funding has gone, and then see the projections in the future. And I think you get a pretty good idea about where the money has been going and where the money is continuing to flow within the city. And there needed to be some option to make it balanced, and I just don't really see it here.
So maybe to respond, again, I would say that the general plan includes a goal. It's related to the Quimby Act to have 3 acres of open space per 1,000 residents citywide. And it is an objective. It's an objective in the general plan that be done as an equitable, in as equitable as possible a way that can be done. However, if the opportunity, particularly if you try to look at it on a year-by-year basis, that isn't calling. I mean, that kind of really says strive for equity over the next 25 years, not to try to balance the dollars being spent in every year.
I think I can go back to when we did look at the Parks and Rec master plan, and for some reason we did not make findings on that, and I'm pretty sure I brought up the lack of equity even at that meeting. So this issue actually, had we made findings and it went to City Council, then they would have heard about this issue and been able to say, oh, we have this issue, we need to, I've actually heard City Council members, request for these maps. They want to have more information. But we didn't make our findings. The Parks and Rec plan went to City Council, and there was, as far as I know, there's been nothing done about it. And, I think it's coming back, and we're having to deal with it again.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner, do you have a specific proposal which you want for the staff? Because I think what we have right now is not something which you feel is fair. Part of it is lack of information which you would like to see. And I think I also sense from the other commissioners that while we would like to move on, they're also sympathetic to the point you're trying to make. So how would you like to move? If we were to suggest what we do, what would you want to do next?
Okay, first, the format issue, I would like to have that straightened out where we're following more into what the San Clemente city has. As to the City Council, I would like them to look at, for instance, the City of San Diego council policy for prioritizing capital improvement program projects. They have a very well done lengthy policy about how to prioritize. And then I think, and I might take City Council intervention on this matter, but I think that it might be that we need to form an ad hoc committee that would determine how many years back they want to look at where the Parks and Rec spending was going, and then we're going to look at the 5-year plan that we have going on here in the future, and we have we have some spreadsheets showing where the money's gone, and we have some maps, and make it very simple for people to see, rather than, having me just, verbally describe this problem, but have some actual data behind it. And I think that you need to get a few people who are interested in this topic together to come up with a way to present that information.
The city staff, do you have any thoughts on what Commissioner Moore is recommending?
I appreciate the discussion. I think the suggestion on formatting and making it easier to understand and read for the public is a valid one, and we'll certainly would take a look at that and look at the materials that you presented. I think in best effort to move forward to some sort of recommendation to City Council, I would suggest that the Commission, you don't necessarily have to pull anything out of it, but you can make as part of our report to City Council certain types of recommendation if you find fit. We'll most certainly incorporate all those comments in our report to City Council. That's what I would suggest. We're having, I believe this item is going to City Council for part of budget review in June, so we don't really have an opportunity to come back and forth, and that's unfortunate this year is the way it is, but we'll certainly look into improving that in the future years. But I will suggest that we take a look at what comments you have, and we can incorporate that into our report, and I believe the City Attorney's Office may have some comments as well.
Just to follow on the Interim Director's comments there, I think that is the correct approach here, and if it provides the Commission some comfort or reassurance, the authorizing code and the government code states that what you are doing is reviewing and reporting to the council on consistency. So you're actually not evidently authorized under the state code to cull anything from this plan, but rather to give your opinion, a majority opinion, on whether it's consistent. And if you can't make that finding, then you state why in the report.
Commissioner Moore, your thoughts on what the city staff has proposed? And Commissioner Takahashi, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, with regard to equity, I think with Parks and Rec, I have not served on Parks and Rec, so I'm going on Commissioner Fund's statement that is a high priority to strive for equity. I think the fundamental issue is there's already inequity because of the way the land is distributed. Mm-hmm. And the feasibility of changing that based on current land values is a problem, right? Unless the city is willing to find, I mean, I think there's some very small parcels that have been discussed, and maybe those should be made a higher priority, and maybe that's a recommendation we can make to strive for equity. But in the reality of the situation, I think that's where the problem comes into play in terms of how do you budget improvements in an equitable fashion, strictly looking east to west, not necessarily even looking north to south, because you could draw that conclusion just as well. I think you have to enter an element of reasonableness with regard to how that can be done, with the element that the city council is striving for as equitable as possible distribution of those elements. To the staff's point about annual inconsistencies, that's to me that makes perfect sense, because you're funding a year at a time, and you're only going to fund this park or this park. You're not going to say, well, I'm not going to spend $1 million on Jollyman, I'm going to spend $25K on all the parks, for example, right? That's just, you're not going to get anything done that way. So you have to parse it out. The year-to-year variability is always going to be there. The question is, how do you, to Commissioner Moore's point, look at the long haul, but then you have to overlay where the parks actually are and what is equitable given that fact. And so it's, to me, it seems like it's very complicated in terms of coming up with how do we do that? Do we look strictly at square feet, and do you draw a 4-quadrant grid in the city and say, okay, here's where they are now, and strive to expand? It gets complicated, and so a committee or a commission to study that that to me sounds like could be a good idea, but it also sounds to me like it's going to take a long time and not be necessarily very efficient, as much as can we push back on Parks and Rec to kind of own that process, if you will, because that's what we're talking about, parks, right? It intersects with us with regard to land. And so, you know, those are just my 2 cents on the situation.
I think it's pretty simple to look at the top projects that we have on the list, and we had some very impassioned residents come and try to get the all-inclusive playground to be moved to Creekside Park, and they failed at that effort. And so it is going to Jollyman Park. And then we also have the McClellan Ranch garden improvements for $1.5 million, again, going to now really the far west of Cupertino, and I don't see a equitable, balanced solution there. So I can't look at this and say it's fair and that it's okay.
So in terms of what the city staff suggested, that we actually record our findings as part of our motions, is it something you would suggest or something else? Commissioner Moore,
Are we allowed to say we find that it is not consistent with the general plan? Is that what you're suggesting for findings? Is that what we do?
I'm not suggesting you find it one way or another. All I'm suggesting is if there's a majority on these issues, whether it's consistent or inconsistent, that you make that finding, we'll record that finding and recommend to the city council.
That seems to indicate that we're going to vote on it, and
Right.
then your finding is that's how it's going to go.
Correct, you have to vote on, that's
Right.
correct.
We have to vote at some point.
but I think first we'll have to even construct a resolution, and I think that's what we should focus on. So from what I understand, there were 2 items which clearly all of us agreed were sort of in the gray area, which we couldn't consciously say were completely in compliance with the plan, the parking lot and the trail.
I
Well-
would just say the parking lot is the only one for me, yeah.
Right, and again, I would agree with that as well, but it's really lack of, because we just don't know the outcome.
Yeah.
And I would assume that once we do know the outcome, it would be reassessed.
Yeah, I think I would say that the lack of full information is good enough reason to say that we can't make that call that it is compliant. You don't have to make the call that it is compliant. You can say we don't have enough information to say that it's compliant. Would that make sense to you? Like, and
You know, the ADA improvements are not an issue.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
so-
yeah.
no, we're
So
talking
what
about
we
the
want to do is, so what I think, you know, the question is whether you can make a resolution that says, yes, we find this
Yeah.
package, you know, we're approving the package, but have these concerns.
Yeah, and we could point out a significant issue associated with locations and equity. I have no issue with that either. But
I have a problem with that because
Right, but
as soon as you start
we're
pulling things
constructing
out.
We're
No,
constructing
let's at least-
something to vote on, and you can obviously vote no,
Yeah, but
as can Commissioner Zaxina, and it'll fail 2-2, or 1-3, or whatever.
let's see
But-
what she has in mind and see if that's something we can agree on. What would you suggest?
Okay, can we kind of reiterate what you've started with, what you've
Mhm.
started with crafting there?
So the city staff suggested that all the things we talked about equity, about the 2, or at least 1, the parking lot, and if possible the craze. We actually mentioned those explicitly, that given the lack of information about the past 5 or 10 years of parkland investment, it's hard for us to say that this is equitable and hence compliant with the spirit of the general plan. That's one thing. Okay, that's one aspect. And if you want to have a slightly different wording or language, feel free. The second one would be about these two specific items, the trail and so on, that the elements of those for which we either know we need more information, that we don't know what's going to happen to the parking lot here, or we don't know what exactly the environmental considerations of the trail work is. So we probably cannot make a call that they are fully compliant with this.
Well, but you can't determine that they're not compliant either, right?
So we're just saying that we can't make the call. So
Well,
we can't make the call.
I guess assuming that they're going to come back and we assess the details, that's when we make the call in terms of the implementation of that specific element. We're just looking at the CIP in general.
Yeah, see, the point is that if we're just looking at it in general, then what's the point of even having this discussion? Because if there's specific items which we have concerns about, then we should call them out. Either we should...
No, because we don't have the details and we won't know until they come to us, right?
So we should call that out, right? That for these items, we have concerns that because we don't have the details...
Right, we can say we have concerns, but what I'm saying is, since we're going to get to look at them in more detail, we can make a decision then specifically on that element, whether or not it's consistent with the general plan and is exempt from CEQA.
It doesn't sound like it's coming back to us, that you've got a date that it's going to city council.
But the project is not approved yet,
Right.
so it's only, it would only be at some time, 2 years from now, when it's actually, a year from now, when it's approved, that would come back at that point.
Okay, so we have an issue with park equity. I think we agree on that, and that we also have an existing condition of a lack of equity, and then now we have spending which is going further, making it worse, and we're also on top of that suggesting that we remove part of a park in an area that's deficient. Do I understand that clearly? Putting the parking lot on the library field.
Right. Well, but we don't know.
So I would go at this a different way. I would suggest that we consider adopting the CIP as presented, but note areas that we think are issues. In particular, one concern would be that removing open space for one of the library parking alternatives is something that we believe will probably be non-compliant when that comes back. And I believe that we also want to give a direction that the Recreation Community Services need to come up with a clearer statement about how they intend to address, in what form will equity be addressed, because that will also bear on whether things will be compliant when those individual projects come back. So I think that what it really says is we're okay, and that actually green lights the things which are not controversial, but for the things which we believe there's a serious issue, that we'll identify that, and then it's up to the council. If they want to say, hey, we want to kick this off the CIP list because we can't address, we're going to kick the inclusive park off because we can't address we don't have a good answer to the equity issue, that's within their power. I don't know whether there are other areas of concern, because there may be, right?
Right, but yeah, we can note what all those areas.
But I would rather do it that way, that we identify, here are the, generally it's good, and we have a few exceptions.
Right.
We have areas of concern.
We have concerns, yeah, areas of concerns.
That the council should be aware of.
Right. I would support that.
If you guys brought back a plan for the library parking, as much as I understand the council's priority on the library extension, if you bring back a plan that says, hey, let's pave over Library Park to do it, to make the parking, I'm going to have a problem with that, right? So, I think that's what we're saying here. That doesn't mean there are many ways you can go that will address the issue of library parking that don't cause a loss of open space.
Commissioner Moo, your thoughts? Is it?
I would prefer to have the entire Parks and Rec entity called, rather than just looking at a couple little things. Because we're talking about equity, I would point it out to them, and they've asked for this information. I would point it out to them that you need this information, and ultimately it's up to them to make it work.
Okay, so to summarize, what we want are the following points to be noted. That we don't have a history of spending of CIP on the parks and recreations to make a call that it has been fair and equitable. We want the council to get it to be reevaluated.
I think we should just raise the issue.
Yeah,
Right.
so,
And we
and,
believe this is an equity issue.
Right.
And that's up to the council. to
and
figure
it's
out
up to the
Right.
council to act on it. Okay, that's number one. Number two, specific items like the parking lot, and you don't want to call it out separately?
I would just call out the whole,
Equity.
Parks and Rec, the Parks and Recreations spending and equity issue. Call it out as on the whole, rather than the individual items, which makes it sound like they could just, we can just get rid of that problem and everything's all good.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to avoid.
Okay, and I think I sense that we agree in spirit that that is what we should ask the council to do. So it looks like we have.
So is it just those two?
No, we don't want. We want to call out the
Okay.
fact that there is a strong feeling that it's not been equitable. We don't have the information about the spending for the past 5, 10, 20 years, and that we want the council to look at it to be.
I don't know about, I think that we believe that there's a long-standing equity issue. I don't,
Okay.
how that's addressed,
Right.
how the council chooses to interpret it, how it's addressed. It doesn't require generating a big report.
Okay. Commissioner Moore, so would you like to craft, because I think you have the most passion about this thing, about how we want to word it, with the help of the city staff?
Okay, I'm going to need a lot of help. So we had an original resolution. So do we need to go back to that one? Okay, and so I'll need to call that up on my laptop here. And then the next part is, there's some parts of the resolution where I didn't like the way it was written, but I'm going to leave that. Okay, so give me a second and I'm going to pull it. Unless somebody has a copy. Okay, so when I read this, the findings, I get to item 1. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission of the City of Cupertino hereby finds, determines, and resolves as follows. 1, the Planning Commission has duly considered the full record before it, including the staff report and presentation, maps, facts, exhibits, public testimony, and other evidence and materials submitted or provided to the Commission. Furthermore, the recitals set forth above are found to be true and correct and are incorporated herein by reference. I do not know how to say that there's missing information. If anyone wants to suggest that.
I think that
Or we could get the staff to draft something new for the next
well,
meeting.
I think that the resolution says we considered what they gave us.
Right.
Right? And then our comment, then we are attaching a comment, and the comment will be that this raises there are, something around that we are raising an issue about whether this CIP, that there's an issue of equity, park equity, or park or open space equity, and that it was unclear whether this CIP, these projects presented, embody the intent of the general plan.
Okay, so I've got the same sentence 1, and then can we add, the Planning Commission finds there is an issue with parkland equity, and how did you finish that statement?
Just the, whether these projects embody
The spirit of the general plan.
Equity
the spirit of the
and-
general plan.
Yeah, okay.
So what we typically do, there's a recommended action, right? So typically what the staff does, you will read into the recommended action. For example, the commission recommend to the city council that you concur that the 5-year capital improvement program conforms to city general plan per the draft resolution, with the exception of, for example, I'm just giving an example, and then you can list 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And we'll synthesize all that and revise the resolution. We don't typically revise resolution on the dais because that makes it a little more difficult,
Okay,
right?
I think I also agree that we should probably do it in a manner which is consistent and everything. So we should probably defer this to the next meeting. What we should have, that's where it will come, right?
So
The-
this is
Well, I
going
think
to
you
city
can give it
council.
this-
It's
we'll
your
give you the
recommendation to city
instruction, and
council.
They'll rewrite it, and that's what we'll move to the council.
Okay, so are we interested in having this sentence, the planning commission?
No, I guess one
Okay.
question is, when you give the instructions and the staff comes up with the new resolution, when will we vote on it?
Tonight?
You vote your recommended action today. Now, if you wish to provide some revised language for the resolution itself, you can certainly do that. All I'm suggesting is that we haven't done that in the past, and it may be a challenge for all 4 of you to agree on the exact language, so.
We're getting close, though.
You get close, that's
Yeah.
fine.
But that's why I was suggesting
Yeah,
we
yeah.
could
Whatever you
take,
guys want to do.
Yeah.
that's why I was suggesting we can take it and then vote on it on the next meeting. Like, if we take it, draft it, and so you can come up with and.
Coming back, this is not coming back to you in the next meeting, this is going to the city council in the
Right.
next meeting.
Well, we can always make it come back.
If you make it come back, it'll come back after city council decision. So it's up to you, we can bring it back and report back on what the city council has determined based on your recommendation, we can do that. But it's not coming back to you again for recommended action.
Then what's the purpose of this meeting?
The purpose is, our purpose is to review the material, comment, and give our comments.
Yeah.
So we're depending on the staff, you make a comment, hopefully the staff won't change that, in some way that's materially a
Yeah, I
problem.
mean, yeah.
And if they did, for some reason, then you would go to the council meeting,
Right,
you go to the
voice-
council meeting,
yeah.
stand up.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I hear that, but it's,
So Commissioner Moore, sorry about that detour. We have recorded on video what you read, but if you want to reread that, it's a clean section for that, we can certainly do that, that'd be better. Thank you.
thank you.
All right, so now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission of the City of Cupertino hereby finds, determines, and resolves as follows. Item 1, the Planning Commission has duly considered the full record before it, including the staff report and presentation, maps, facts, exhibits, public testimony, and other evidence and materials submitted or provided to the Commission. Furthermore, the recitals set forth above are found to be true and correct and are incorporated herein by reference. The Planning Commission finds there is an issue with parkland equity and whether these projects embody the spirit of the general plan.
Short and sweet.
Thank you, it's very clear.
Okay. All right, so I think we all are at a point where we can call for a vote.
Unless there's any other issues that anybody has.
So I'm looking for a,
Did someone actually make a motion?
yeah, I'm looking for a,
We're doing
Okay.
that.
One more time. Commissioner Moore.
You can just say it.
Okay, I'll need some assistance with this.
Well,
So I move to
Yep, and then just say exactly what you said before, I think.
approve the draft resolution. Freudian slip. I'm going to start over. I move that we approve the draft resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Cupertino finding the proposed 5-year capital improvement plan fiscal years 2019, 20 to 2023, 24. Okay, I have to stop here because it says consistent with the Cupertino, with the City of Cupertino general plan. So, and now I'm altering sentence 1, or can I leave the opening as it is? And, I need some help.
If I may, going back to the acting director's earlier comment, one option here would be to keep items 1, 2, and 3 of the resolution as is, and then just simply add "except that" after the third one, and then you state your exceptions.
Okay, so is this, so the draft resolution is still going to say at the top that that we find it, that it's consistent with the Cupertino general plan, and then add an exception? Is that how we're going to work that? Okay.
Or that could, if the commission agrees, staff could change that to regarding the proposed 5-year capital improvement program, and that leaves it a little more open-ended.
Okay, I think that would be more in the spirit of what we're talking about.
Okay, could you let me know where
where's that
that's
addition?
going now?
It's just a changing of.
Sure, so Commissioner Moore, were you referring to the capital wording at the top of the page?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with the draft resolution. The whole top is exactly as it is, and then we're going to add an exception.
So
or-
just regarding the title of the resolution, if that's what we're talking about right now,
okay.
you could just change the word, and I'll read it for the public's benefit here. Oops,
Okay.
I just lost my. So could you read out the all caps?
Sure.
And just replacing the word finding with regarding.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
And then will I finish with, instead of having, we're still going to have item 1 edited as stated?
Well, what I said a moment ago would actually be that 1, 2, and 3 of the actual resolution remain as is.
Okay.
Except that at the end of 3, there be inserted a semicolon and then it say except that, and that's where you put your exception.
Okay.
That's just for the commission's consideration.
Okay, so item 3 is going to be lengthened then? That's where it's going to go?
Yeah, can I see
okay.
if staff, is that, yeah, okay.
Okay. Draft resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Cupertino regarding the proposed 5-year capital improvement program, fiscal years 2019 to 2023 to 24, consistent with the City of Cupertino general plan.
Consistency with.
Okay, that's a typo then. Finding
because of the
consistency,
change, yeah.
got it, okay. And then item 3, the Planning Commission finds in accordance with the Cupertino Municipal Code, CMC Section 2.32070C, and state law based on the evidence in the public record that the city's CIP fiscal year 2019-2020 to 2023-24 is consistent with the city's general plan community vision 2040, except that the Planning Commission finds there is an issue with the parkland equity and whether these projects embody the spirit of the general plan.
Now you need a second.
I second.
Now we go to vote. Okay, the motion passes 4-0. And now we can move on to the other items of the agenda. The next is old business. Do we have any old business to talk about?
We do not have any old business or new business on the agenda.
Okay. The staff and commission reports.
No staff reports.
Commissioners, did you want to talk about anything you did over the long weekend and anything else? Commissioner Fung, I'm sure you did something.
Got a few. I attended the Housing Commission meeting on 5/16 on behalf of the Planning Commission. There were a number of issues that actually, that they raised in that meeting, which will be coming here. Particularly, one of the items they discussed was around proposed revisions to the ADU policy. That's an extensive document, and there's actually an extensive set of points that they had raised for consideration that will be coming here at some time in the next bit. I attended the McClellan Road separated bike path kickoff and the Public Works open house. Director Lee, that was really great as always. And then also attended a number of events related to Affordable Housing Week, the second half of Affordable Housing Week.
Commissioner Moore? Thank you.
I did attend some of the affordable housing meetings, and there was one that was a little bothersome because they were not recognizing how the jobs, if you keep increasing jobs, that it worsens the housing shortage. And I also went to the Housing Commission meeting and then met with some people from Eden Housing. And, well, actually before that, I met some people from Eden Housing. And what the Housing Commission is doing right now is having all the city-owned properties tabulated with their land use and zoning to see if we have some potential sites for affordable housing within the city. So I look forward to seeing that information in the future. That's it.
Yeah. I don't have any commission report to talk about. I think the DRC hasn't met ever since I've become the vice chairman. I'm looking forward to the first meeting. I do want to have a comment for the staff on the items which Commissioner Mood pointed about the format of the thing and the suggestions he had about from the city of San Clemente. So the city staff, is that something which we can consider for the next?
Absolutely, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we'll certainly take a look at that. We'll take a look at the materials again and see if there's ways that we can improve on our formatting. You know, in the past, it's refreshing to hear that. So right, we haven't received those kind of comments in the past. So, but now that we have, we'll certainly make best efforts to make improvements.
Yeah, and if you want, we could sort of make it as a part of the agenda for the next meeting where you can even show something and we can say, hey, next time let's do it that way.
Yeah, so we'll take a look at our resources and upcoming hearing agendas and try to get that on and work with the Public Works Department to try and get it on the upcoming agenda. I can't promise it'll be next one. We already have a pretty full agenda for the next coming, but we'll certainly make our best efforts.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, we have come to the end of the meeting and I'm going to adjourn it.
A boy born in Joplin, Missouri was fascinated by anything with wheels and a motor. The odds of him going on to fascinate millions with his talent? 1 in 260,000.